The air is warm, not the warm of a summer afternoon, but the warm of a living world thick with moisture, heavy with the slow exhalations of a million growing things. You are breathing air that no human being has ever breathed before. It is richer than anything your lungs have known, faintly sweet with the sap of conifers so tall. Their crowns have disappeared into the dark, laced with the mineral coolness of water moving somewhere not far from here. It is night, but not the night you know. The moon is rising. It moves with the particular slowness of a moon that is the only light in all of the world, climbing above the serrated silhouettes of cycad fronds and ancient fern trees and the immense flanks of conifers whose bark smells of warm resin and old rain. The moonlight here is different. It falls differently. It touches things that have never been touched by anything but sunlight and darkness, and the slow pulse of biological time. You are standing in the Jurassic world. It is approximately 150 million years ago. The continent beneath your feet is not yet the continent of any map you have ever seen. It is something older, larger, more fluid, a landmass in the slow process of becoming. The jungle around you is a version of jungle that will not exist again. It is stranger than you would expect. It is quieter in some ways, louder in others. It smells like nothing in your memory, though something in your older, animal self recognizes it. You are safe here. You are a visitor, a gentle presence at the edge of an enormous night. Nothing here can harm you. You are simply watching, simply breathing, simply being still in a world that existed long before stillness had a name. Close your eyes, or keep them open. Either way, the Jurassic will find you. It will come in through the soles of your feet, through the damp warmth of the air on your skin, through the sound of wind moving through the canopy somewhere above. It will surround you the way all ancient things surround those who stop long enough to listen. The jungle breathes, the moon climbs, the night has only just begun. There is a version of the world that existed for so long and ended so completely that it sometimes feels less like history and more like a dream some older version of the Earth once had and forgot. The Jurassic period lasted for approximately 56 million years. 56 million years of mornings and evenings, of seasons cycling through patterns we have no names for, of storms building and breaking over landscapes that would be unrecognizable to any living human eye. 56 million years of nights exactly like this one. Tonight, you are going to spend a few hours inside one of those nights. You are going to move through the Jurassic jungle the way water moves through stone, slowly, gently, without force. You will hear things. You will smell things. You will feel the texture of this world against the surface of your awareness, and when sleep finds you, as it will, you will carry something of this ancient air with you into whatever comes next. If you enjoy listening to prehistoric sleep stories like this, stories that carry you back through time to worlds that breathe and grow and move in ways nothing in modern life can quite replicate, please consider subscribing. New stories arrive weekly, and each one is a different window into a different deep past. There is no hurry. You are already exactly where you need to be. Now, let us settle into this. Let us begin at the beginning of the night, which is to say at the end of the Jurassic day, at that particular hour when the light goes and something older takes its place. The Jurassic period spans from roughly 201 million years ago to approximately 145 million years ago. These are numbers so large they resist ordinary imagination. And that is perhaps just as well. For our purposes tonight, we do not need to hold the entire sweep of Jurassic time in our minds. We only need this evening, this clearing, this canopy of dark green pressing close above us like a second sky. The world you are standing in tonight is a world without grass. There is no grass anywhere on Earth at this moment. Every piece of open ground is covered instead by ferns and mosses and spreading horsetail plants, plants so ancient they predate the dinosaurs themselves. The floor of this jungle is soft with accumulated fern fronds, with the compost of 1,000 years of plant life cycling back into soil. Beneath your feet, the ground has a give to it, a slight give, like the earth is breathing. There are no flowers here either. The first flowering plants will not appear for another 40 to 50 million years. What exists here instead is something older and in its own way more austere forests of towering conifers, whose cones release pollen into seasonal winds, cycads with their crown of stiff fronds and their slow, patient lives that stretch to hundreds of years, ginkgo trees whose leaves in a certain angle of moonlight look like small open hands. Some of these plants are still alive today, virtually unchanged. The ginkgo you might pass on a modern city street is growing leaves that are almost identical to the leaves casting shadows on the Jurassic ground beneath your feet tonight. Let that settle for a moment. 150 million years. And still, the same leaf shape. There is something steadying about that, something that makes the distance between this ancient night and your own feel slightly less absolute. The animals you will encounter here are real. Everything in this story happened, not in the way that a human story happens, not with intention or meaning or narrative arc, but in the way that biological reality happens, which is to say continuously, quietly, without pausing for observation. The creatures of this jungle did not know they were interesting. They did not know they were ancient. They simply lived and breathed and moved through nights, exactly like this one. And that is the most extraordinary thing of all. We are going to move through this night together. There is no urgency to our movement. We are not trying to reach anything. We are not cataloguing or documenting or arriving at conclusions. We are simply being here, in this warm and fragrant and profound darkness, letting 150 million years of life go on around us. Settle back. Soften whatever you are holding. The Jurassic has been waiting patiently. It does not mind waiting a little longer while you make yourself comfortable. It has, after all, been doing this for 56 million years. A few more moments will not trouble it at all. The transition from day to night in the Jurassic happens with a gradation that is both familiar and profoundly strange. The sun goes. That part is the same. It always goes. But the quality of the light as it leaves is different here. There are no dust particles of the kind that modern industrial civilization throws into the atmosphere, no fine particulates to scatter the final wavelengths into the deep oranges and vivid purples that modern sunsets wear. The Jurassic sunset is cleaner, sharper at the edges. The sky goes from pale gold to a color between green and grey, and then, within perhaps 30 minutes, to a darkness that is more complete than anything you have ever experienced outdoors. In that transition, the jungle changes. You can feel it happening, rather than see it precisely the way the air around you shifts slightly in temperature, dropping by perhaps 2 or 3 degrees as the canopy stops absorbing heat and begins releasing it. The smell changes too. The daytime smell of the Jurassic jungle is all warmth and resin and something faintly medicinal from the cycad oils. The nighttime smell is wetter, cooler. The mosses and ferns begin releasing a green, slightly acidic fragrance as the dew begins to form on their surfaces. And this mixes with the deep mineral scent of the soil and the distant sweetness of water, a river, perhaps, or one of the wide, shallow lakes that fills and empties with the seasons in this part of the world. Here is something that very few people know about the Jurassic night. It was slightly shorter than the nights you are accustomed to. The Earth rotated faster then, by a measurable amount, not dramatically different, but enough that a full Jurassic day and night cycle was closer to 22 or 23 hours than the 24 we have now. The planet has been gradually slowing down since its formation, pulled by the tidal friction of the moon dragging against the oceans. By the Jurassic period, this slowdown was well underway, but had not yet reached its modern pace. If you had a clock here, which of course you do not, and would have no use for, you would find that the night passes slightly faster than expectation. The darkness moves through its hours with a quiet efficiency. The moon rises as the last of the day's warmth leaves the understory. And this moon, too, is slightly different. It is closer. Not so much closer that it would look dramatically larger, the change is subtle. Something that would register more as a feeling than as a visible difference. But the moon of the Jurassic is approximately 1,400 kilometers nearer to Earth than the moon of your own time, still slowly spiraling outward the way it always has, moving away from us at roughly 3 centimeters per year. At this distance, in this air, its light on the ferns and the mosses is slightly more vivid. The shadows it throws are slightly harder edged. You are standing at the margin of a clearing, your back to the bulk of the jungle, looking out across an open space perhaps 200 meters across where the canopy breaks and the sky is fully visible. The clearing formed some years ago when one of the enormous conifers, a tree perhaps 60 meters tall and centuries old, fell, taking several of its neighbors with it in the collapse. In the years since, the gap has filled with younger growth, tree ferns, whose fronds arch 15 meters into the air, horsetails in dense stands along the edges, and in the very center of the clearing, where the light has been strongest, a stand of cycads whose thick trunks bear the scars of a lightning strike from some decade past. This kind of gap in the canopy is called a light gap, and light gaps in Jurassic forests were sites of intense biological competition. The moment light reached the forest floor, dozens of species rushed to fill the space. Ferns first, as always, because ferns are fast and opportunistic and have been colonizing bare ground for 300 million years, a habit so deeply encoded in their biology that they do it almost reflexively. Then the slower-growing conifers and cycads would begin their long, patient climb toward the recovered canopy. A large, light gap like this one might take 2 or 3 centuries to fully close. In the meantime, it was an island of relative openness in a sea of dense, interlocking green. The first sound you notice, now that the day birds have gone quiet, is the insect sound. It is nothing like what you might expect. There are no crickets in the Jurassic. True crickets will not evolve until much later. But there are proto-orthopterans, the ancestors of crickets and grasshoppers, and on warm nights like this they produce a sound that is at once familiar and subtly wrong, a rhythmic rasping that has the pattern of cricket song but not quite the tone, as if someone tried to describe cricket sound from memory and got the structure right, but missed some essential quality of the pitch. This sound rises now from the tall ferns at the edge of the clearing, from the moist zones near the base of the cycad trunks, from somewhere in the dense horsetail stands where the ground never fully dries. Beneath that sound, deeper, almost at the edge of perception, a bass vibration that you feel as much as hear. It comes from the forest behind you. It is rhythmic, slow, the footfalls of something very large moving through the dark trees with a calm that only comes from being the largest thing in any given landscape. You cannot yet see it. Whatever it is still some distance away, moving parallel to the clearing rather than toward it, following some route through the forest that has nothing to do with you. The ground does not shake. This is a misconception about large dinosaurs. The footfalls of even the largest sauropods were probably not perceptible as vibrations through the ground, unless you were within a few dozen meters of them. What you feel is something else. Something more like a presence, an awareness that the dark between the trees is occupied by something of enormous weight and calm intention. For now, it moves on. The sound fades. The insect chorus reasserts itself. The moon continues its climb, and as it clears the upper fringe of the tree ferns at the far edge of the clearing, its light spills across the open space in a way that shows you things the pre-moon darkness had hidden. The silver gleam of moisture on the fern fronds, the geometric regularity of the horsetail stems, the way the cycad trunks cast precise shadow wedges on the ground. The clearing is a room, an outdoor room, roofed by sky rather than canopy. And in the slow-falling moonlight, it has something of the quality of a room someone has recently left, slightly warmer than the surrounding air, marked by the evidence of recent habitation, peaceful in the particular way that spaces are peaceful, when they hold the memory of activity that has just passed. You settle into the edge of it. The ground here is damp, but not wet, padded with layers of fallen fern material that has been composting for years. The smell of it, the deep green-black smell of Jurassic soil, is something that has no modern equivalent, and yet something in the oldest part of your mammalian brain responds to it with something that might be called recognition. Your ancestors, small, furry, nocturnal things, the size of shrews, moved through nights like this one. They breathed this air. This smell is not unfamiliar to some part of you that predates memory. The first hour of the Jurassic night settles around you like something placed with great care. The insect sounds weave their rhythmic patterns. The moon moves. Somewhere in the forest, the large thing has found whatever it was moving toward and gone still. The jungle is not silent. It will never be silent tonight, but it has reached a kind of equilibrium, a sustainable volume, a hum of nocturnal life that is just loud enough to fill the air and just quiet enough to let the mind release its grip on the day's affairs. Let the day go. You have nothing to accomplish here. The Jurassic asks nothing of you. It simply continues, as it has continued for millions of years before this moment, and will continue for millions of years after. And you are a small, welcome, entirely temporary guest at the edge of one of its numberless nights. Breathe. The air is warm, the moon is rising, the night is only beginning, and it has everything to show you. The language of leaves. The canopy of the Jurassic jungle at night is a different world from the canopy in daylight, and it is worth spending a moment simply looking upward, past the arching fronds of the tree ferns, past the lower branches of the younger conifers at the edge of the clearing, toward that place where the upper forest meets the open sky. In daylight, the Jurassic canopy is a dense green ceiling through which light filters in columns and pools, where the business of photosynthesis is conducted with a kind of industrious silence. At night, the canopy becomes something else, a lacy architecture of dark against dark, where branches and fronds and the occasional emergent crown of an ancient tree create a texture against the star-scattered sky that is both intricate and restful. The plants of the Jurassic jungle are so old, so precedent-setting, so fundamental to the architecture of all the life that follows them, that it is worth lingering with them here in the dark. They are not exciting in the way that animals are exciting. They do not move quickly or make sounds or pursue anything. But they are the structure that makes everything else possible, the living scaffolding on which an entire world is built. And to stand among them at night and understand what they are is to understand something essential about the patience of life. Begin with the conifers. They are everywhere in this forest, not the same species you would find in a modern woodland, but recognizable relatives of trees that still exist. The dominant trees here have no common names because they have no living descendants that modern language has bothered to name. But they resemble closely a mix between a modern redwood and an Araucaria pine. Their bark is thick and fibrous, warm to the touch even in the night air. And beneath the outer layers of bark runs a living network of tissue that pulses, very slowly, with something analogous to a heartbeat, the transport of water and sugars through vessels thinner than a human hair, moving upward through 60 meters of wood with a pressure and precision that no human engineering has yet matched. Here is a fact that most people who study the Jurassic find quietly astonishing. The conifers of this period were capable of growing to nearly 200 feet, approximately 60 meters in height, taller in many cases than the trees that occupy the same geographic zones today. The reason they grew so tall was a combination of higher atmospheric carbon dioxide, which fueled aggressive photosynthesis, and the absence of competition from flowering plants, which had not yet evolved their aggressive strategies for sun capture. The conifers of the Jurassic had the sky essentially to themselves, and they grew into it with an unhurried magnificence. But what truly sets the Jurassic night smell apart from any modern forest is the resin. Conifers produce resin, most people know this, but the quantity produced by Jurassic conifers vastly exceeded what modern trees generate. The Jurassic atmosphere was warm and humid, conditions that accelerated resin flow, and the forests were filled with insects that chewed into bark and triggered defensive resin production on a nearly constant basis. The result was a forest in which exposed wood gleamed with fresh resin in the moonlight, in which the air carried a sharp, clean, almost medicinal fragrance that mixed with the damp, organic scent of the forest floor to create something impossible to name in any modern vocabulary. That resin, as it happens, is a gift to the future. Resin that falls and is buried can harden over millions of years into amber. The amber deposits now found in France, Lebanon, Myanmar, and elsewhere contain within them the trapped bodies of Jurassic insects, plant fragments, air bubbles holding actual samples of Jurassic atmosphere, and occasionally the shed skins of creatures that wandered across a sticky resin flow and lost something of themselves to it. These are among the most intimate records of the Jurassic world that exist, not the great bones of sauropods, but the trapped moment of a beetle's wing, a plant hair, the impression of a tiny claw. The amber is the forest's memory, kept in resin and silence. Below the conifers, occupying the middle layer of the forest, are the cycads. You have perhaps seen cycads in botanical gardens, those stiff-fronded plants that look like small squat palms topped with a starburst of dark green leaves. In the Jurassic, cycads occupied an ecological position that flowering plants have since largely claimed. They were the dominant mid-story plants across most of the world's tropical and subtropical forests. They grew slowly, as they still do, accumulating decades of growth in thick, scarred trunks that bore the marks of every season, every drought, every browsing animal that had tested their fronds and found them unpalatable. Cycads are interesting in the dark because they do not quite disappear the way some plants do. Their fronds catch the moonlight along their upper surfaces, which have a slight waxy sheen, and in the right angle of lunar light they glow faintly, like low-set stars nestled into the forest interior. Their shadows fall in regular patterns, spoke-like, radiating from the central trunk in ways that have a geometric quality that seems almost intentional. Walking through a grove of cycads in Jurassic moonlight, you would have the sense of moving through something designed, something with an internal logic, though the logic is purely biological leaf arrangement maximizing light capture, trunk spacing, reflecting competition for soil resources, frond angles, balancing water, shedding against sun exposure. What you would not find in this jungle is any form of flower. The absence of flowers from the Jurassic world is one of those facts that, once you truly absorb it, changes the way you understand the world you come from. Flowers feel so fundamental to the concept of a plant that a world without them seems almost definitionally incomplete. And yet for the first 350 million years of plant life on land, from the earliest mosses and ferns colonizing Silurian shores to the Jurassic forests of tonight, there were no flowers, none, not one. What existed instead were more austere reproductive strategies, wind-pollinated pollen cones and seed cones in the conifers, stiff pollen, bearing structures in the cycads, spore clouds from the ferns and horsetails. The ferns deserve particular attention because they are extraordinary survivors. They are the oldest group of complex plants through mass extinctions and climate catastrophes, and the rise and fall of dozens of dominant animal groups. The ferns in this forest tonight are almost identical in their fundamental biology to the ferns that you might find growing in a garden or a woodland right now. They have changed almost nothing in all that time. The unfurling frondocrosia, the fiddlehead, that tight coil of new growth unspooling from the crown of the plant. It has been uncoiling exactly that way for longer than any other complex plant structure on Earth. At night, the ferns move. This is their secret. In daylight, fern movement is subtle, imperceptible to ordinary watching, but at night, in the slight cooling that comes with the dark, the fronds adjust position, a slow drooping, a slight rotation toward the remembered angle of the set sun. This movement is not conscious. It is the hydraulic response of cells adjusting water pressure in response to temperature change. But in the moonlight, among the shadows and the silence, the ferns seem almost to breathe, almost to shift their weight from foot to foot the way a resting animal might. And this gives the forest at night a quality of latent animation that is deeply, wordlessly calming. The horsetails along the wetter zones at the edge of the clearing are worth noting too. You may think of horsetails as small, weedy plants, and in the modern world, the surviving horsetail species are indeed relatively modest, rarely exceeding a meter in height. But horsetails have not always been modest. Their ancestors, the tree-sized calamites, reached 15 meters in height in the Carboniferous period. By the Jurassic, tree-sized horsetails were gone, but the plants themselves remained, and they occupied every wet margin, every stream bank, every depression where water collected. They smelled of something faintly astringent, something mineral, a green and slightly metallic scent that you notice as you draw closer to the edge of the clearing where the drainage runs lower. And what of the ginkgo? The ginkgo tree, Ginkgo biloba, still alive today in parks and streets from Seoul to San Francisco, was already ancient in the Jurassic. Its ancestors had existed since the Permian period. And by the time of the world you are standing in, the ginkgo had diversified into numerous species distributed across the landmasses of Pangaea and its breaking fragments. The particular fan-shaped leaf of the ginkgo, which has survived unchanged to the present day, is among the most successful leaf forms in the history of plant evolution. It is efficient, it is remarkably resistant to pollution and drought. It is, in some deep evolutionary sense, simply correct. In Jurassic moonlight, ginkgo leaves are silver. Their bilobed shape, divided at the center by a slight notch, catches light along both lobes and casts a double shadow below. Ginkgo trees tend to grow in places with good drainage hillsides, the tops of river terraces, raised ground within the forest, and in the Jurassic, They were often the tallest visible trees in areas where conifers were less dominant. Their bark smells faintly of something vaguely fruity, which is a quality shared by their modern descendants, and it is one of the subtler pleasures of a Jurassic night to stand near a large ginkgo and breathe that particular smell, and know that it is a smell that existed, unchanged, for 150 million years before you arrived to notice it. You are standing among all of this now. The canopy above you is a mosaic of conifer needles and cycad fronds, and the occasional silver ginkgo leaf catching the moon. The forest floor beneath you is deep with fern compost and horsetail stems. The resin smell is everywhere, particular and ancient. The leaves move in a slow, irregular way, the faintest of breezes finding its way through the canopy from some direction you cannot determine. And in that movement, the shadows move too, the whole dark and silver patchwork of the forest, shifting almost imperceptibly, like something breathing in its sleep. Let the breath of the forest become your breath. Let the slow movement of the leaves set the pace for whatever is still moving in your thoughts. Everything that seems to need resolution tonight can wait. The leaves have been resolving nothing for 300 million years, and they are perfectly content. There is wisdom in that. There is rest in that. There is something that the Jurassic knows about patience that it is willing, right now, to share with you. Rest here a moment in the language of leaves. They have been speaking it for a very long time. You do not need to understand it to feel its meaning move through you like water through old stone. Slow and steady and continuous. Going somewhere you don't need to see, to trust. If you find yourself drifting now, let yourself go. There is more waiting for you on the other side of sleep, and you can always return to walk further through this ancient night. If stories like this one are how you find your rest, consider subscribing. A new Prehistoric World arrives each week, and each one is its own dark and quiet and ancient place, waiting to receive you. What you heard earlier, that deep, slow percussion of something enormous moving through the trees, was the sound of a sauropod. You know this without being told, the way you would know the sound of the ocean without seeing it. Something about the wait, the interval between footfalls, the small secondary sounds that accompany it, the soft brush of a tail against fern fronds, the low exhalation of an animal breathing in a register that is almost below the range of human hearing, all of this arranges itself into a recognition that is older than thought. The sauropods of the late Jurassic are among the most extraordinary animals that have ever existed on this planet. They are not particularly fast. They are not, individually, particularly cunning. What they are is vast, in a way that resists easy quantification. The animal you are about to see, a diplodocid, one of the long-necked, long-tailed sauropods that dominated this region in this period, is approximately 25 meters long from the tip of its snout to the end of its tail. It stands at the shoulder roughly 5 meters above the ground. It weighs in the region of 15 tons, though some of its kind reach considerably more. The sauropods moved through the night, for reasons that scientists are still working to fully understand. They were not exclusively nocturnal, they fed during daylight hours as well, but there is good fossil evidence that they were active in the dark too, particularly in the hotter months, when daytime temperatures drove them to seek shelter and the nights offered cooler, more comfortable conditions for movement. In a forest like this one, where the canopy retained warmth from the day, the night temperature might still be 25 to 28 degrees, warm enough that a large animal generating its own metabolic heat would need to manage that heat carefully. Here is something about sauropod anatomy that reveals itself most clearly when you watch them move. Their bones were not solid. This is one of the more arresting facts about these animals, one that changes the way you see them from pure mass into something more nuanced. Sauropod vertebrae, the bones of the spine, were excavated by air sacs, pneumatized to a degree that modern birds, the dinosaurs' direct descendants, still practice. Up to 60% of the volume of certain sauropod vertebrae was air. This made the skeleton far lighter than its external dimensions would suggest, and it also means that these animals were, in some deep sense, moving air through themselves, the way birds do, using the air sac system not just for respiration, but as part of a whole-body cooling and circulation mechanism. The implication of all that hollow bone is something that surprises people. Large sauropods were probably not nearly as loud when they moved as popular imagination suggests. The footfall of an animal whose skeleton is substantially hollow is different from the footfall of an equivalent mass of solid bone and muscle. They were large, but they were not necessarily thunderous. At a distance of even 100 meters, a moving sauropod would have been perceptible more as a presence, a particular quality of the air, a displacement in the background sounds of the jungle than as a physical impact through the ground. And now you see one. It has emerged from the forest to the north of the clearing, crossing the open space with a gait that is unhurried to the point of being almost meditative. The word that comes to mind is ancient, though everything here is ancient and that word has lost some of its weight. Perhaps the better word is self-possessed. The diplodocid moves with the complete assurance of an animal that has no reasonable fear, that has not needed to develop the habit of wariness, because nothing in this landscape poses it a credible threat. Its neck swings gently as it moves, not held rigidly upright as older illustrations suggested, but carried roughly horizontally at about shoulder height, swaying slightly with each step in a counterbalance to the movement of the tail. The tail. You cannot look away from the tail. It is long in a way that the word long does not capture nearly as long as the body itself, tapering from the thick muscular base to a fine whip-like end that trails behind the animal and occasionally catches on fern fronds and then releases them in a slow, absent-minded way. Recent research has suggested that diplodocid tails, at their finest end, could potentially be moved at speeds sufficient to produce a sonic crack, not a loud, aggressive weapon, but a display behavior, perhaps, or a form of communication used between individuals to coordinate movement through dense forest. Whether this happened at night or only in daylight, we cannot know. The tail moves silently now. Its tip drags through the fern canopy at the edge of the clearing and leaves a gentle disturbance behind it. A channel pressed into the darkness where the fronds have been displaced. The head is small, disproportionately small for the size of the body. A diplodocid's skull would barely fill a suitcase, and in profile it has a long, almost horse-like shape with nostrils positioned high on the snout. Recent research has suggested, and this is one of those facts that feels strange and wonderful in equal measure, that sauropods may have had some form of fleshy structure over their nostrils, perhaps a trunk-like projection or an inflatable nasal structure used for display or vocalization. We cannot know this with certainty because soft tissue does not fossilize, but the architecture of the skull, the positioning of the nasal cavity, the geometry of the surrounding musculature, all of this is more consistent with some form of external nasal elaboration than with the bare, exposed nostrils that older reconstructions assumed. The diplodocid pauses at the center of the clearing. It stands very still for a long moment, perhaps 30 seconds, perhaps a full minute, and in that stillness its breathing is audible, not loud, not dramatic, a slow, deep exhalation that comes from somewhere very deep in the body. A breath that takes several seconds to complete, followed by an inhalation that is equally deliberate. This is the breathing of something that has no reason to breathe quickly. Everything about this animal moves at the speed of its own sufficiency. It is grazing, in a manner of speaking. The ferns at the center of the clearing are the right height for a diplodocid to reach. Without extending the neck vertically, horizontal reach is the natural mode for this neck geometry, and it has been moving through clearings like this one all evening, stripping the upper fronds from the fern banks in long, raking movements of the lower jaw. The teeth of diplodocids are not designed for chewing. They are designed for raking long, peg-like, functioning like a comb that strips plant material from stems and swallows it essentially whole, leaving the actual mechanical breakdown of the food to a specialized part of the digestive tract that works on the material after the fact. What this animal eats in a single day is an amount of plant material that is difficult to comprehend on a domestic scale. Estimates vary, but a large diplodocid probably consumed somewhere between 200 and 500 kilograms of plant material daily. And yet, for all the voraciousness this implies, the act of feeding looks calm. It looks almost ceremonial. The head moves, the teeth comb through the ferns, the throat works with slow swallowing movements, and then the whole apparatus readjusts and begins again. There is no urgency in it. There is nothing approaching hunger or desperation. This is simply eating the way the tide, is simply incoming a regular, rhythmic, biologically ordained process that continues whether or not anyone is watching. A micro-hook of the natural world presents itself here. One of those questions that the Jurassic night poses without quite answering. Did these animals know each other? Not in the way primates know one another, not with names and histories and social complexity. But sauropods did travel in groups. Their trackways, the preserved footprints found in sedimentary deposits around the world, show parallel tracks, multiple animals of different sizes, moving in the same direction at the same time. Young animals traveled with adults. The herd, if that word can be applied to animals of this kind, had some form of cohesion, and cohesion requires something, some form of recognition, some faculty for distinguishing familiar individuals from strangers. The diplodocid in the clearing has not acknowledged you. It cannot smell you exactly as a modern herbivore might smell a human presence. The olfactory systems of sauropods were, as far as we can determine from skull architecture, less acute than those of modern mammals. But it is not unaware of your presence either. At some point in the last few minutes, its head turned slightly in your direction, held for a moment, then returned to its feeding. Whatever conclusion it reached was apparently of no concern. You are small. You are still. You mean nothing to the math of its night. This is, in its way, one of the most peaceful things you can experience in the Jurassic jungle. To be assessed by something so large and so ancient and found so utterly inconsequential. To be reduced to background. To be simply part of the scene that the diplodocid moves through on its evening route, no more noteworthy than the fern bank it is currently eating or the standing water at the clearing's low edge in which the moon is making its pale reflection. You are here, and you are harmless, and you are forgettable. And this is exactly the right way to be in a world this old and this uninterested in human significance. The diplodocid finishes its long pause and moves on. It crosses the remainder of the clearing with those slow, self-possessed steps and re-enters the forest on the far side. Its tail, the last thing to disappear into the dark between the trees. For a moment after it has gone, the forest on that side is quieter. The insect sounds there have diminished slightly, aware of something large in their vicinity, and then, gradually, over perhaps 2 minutes, the insect chorus rebuilds itself to its previous level. The clearing is yours again. The ferns at the center have a channel through them now, a gentle parting where the diplodocid's belly passed through their upper fronds. And in the moonlight, this channel gleams slightly, the exposed undersides of the fronds catching the light differently from the upper surfaces. It is a mark, a trace, the evidence that something real passed through this space, left its impression, and moved on. Tomorrow the ferns will have repositioned themselves and the mark will be gone. Tonight it is there, temporary and precise, a small record of something very large. Let your thoughts be like that. Let whatever is busy in your mind pass through this moment and leave only its trace, its gentle channel in the ferns of your attention, and then let even that close. The diplodocid is gone into the forest. The night holds its passage as gently as it holds everything else. There is room here for whatever you need to set down. The moon above this clearing is the same moon that hangs above your own night sky, the same body of rock and ancient dust, the same Moriah, the dark basalt plains that human beings have seen for as long as there have been human beings, to look up the same roughly circular shape that has been making its circuit of the Earth for approximately 4.5 billion years. It is old enough to have watched the first cells appear in Archean seas. It has seen the emergence of multicellular life, the invasion of the land by plants and then animals, the rise and fall of the trilobites, the Permian catastrophe, and now this. The Jurassic in full, thriving, extraordinary flower, with sauropods grazing in moonlit clearings and ferns, uncurling in the dark. The moon is not an accident. It is the result of one of the most violent events in Earth's early history, a collision, roughly 4.5 billion years ago, with a Mars-sized body that scientists call Theia. This impact was so energetic that it partially liquefied the surface of the early Earth and threw an enormous amount of material into orbit. Over perhaps a few thousand years, that material coalesced into what we now call the Moon. The process was cataclysmic beyond any useful scale of comparison, and the result, this quiet, pale disk making its steady way across the Jurassic sky, is so useful, so stabilizing, so essential to the conditions that allow life to exist and thrive on Earth, that it is difficult not to feel a retrospective gratitude toward whatever orbital physics arranged for such a catastrophe to happen when it did. The moon stabilizes Earth's axial tilt. Without it, the Earth's axis would wobble chaotically, swinging over millions of years through a range of orientations that would produce climate extremes far beyond anything that has ever actually happened. The relatively mild, by geological standards, range of climatic variation that the Earth has experienced is in part a consequence of having a large moon to act as a gravitational anchor. The Jurassic climate, for all its greenhouse warmth and lushness, was a stable climate by the standards of what it might have been. The moon made it so. The tides were different here. The Jurassic moon, closer than it is today, raised tides that were somewhat more energetic than modern tides, not dramatically, but measurably. Coastal ecosystems were shaped by this slightly stronger tidal rhythm, and the coastal habitats of the Jurassic, the shallow lagoons and estuaries and tidal flats that can be read in certain limestone and mudstone formations around the world, show the traces of tidal processes more vigorous than anything operating on today's coasts. Far inland, as you are tonight, this makes no perceptible difference. But at the coast, the Jurassic Sea would have been slightly more restless. The tidal zones slightly more extensive, the mixing of salt and fresh water in the estuaries slightly more pronounced. The night sky itself, looked at properly here, is different from the night sky you know. Different not in its fundamental composition. The stars are the same stars, the same hydrogen-burning nuclear furnaces, arrayed in the same general distribution, but different in the precise positions of those stars relative to the constellations you might recognize. The Earth's axis wobbles slowly on a cycle of approximately 26,000 years, a movement called precession, and over the course of 150 million years, this wobble has moved the pole of the sky to a completely different position. The star that sits closest to true north in your own time Polaris, the North Star was not the pole star in the Jurassic. In fact, no star was sitting near the pole at all in this period. The pole was in a relatively empty region of the sky, with no bright star nearby, to serve as a fixed point of navigation. Does this matter to the animals of the Jurassic? Almost certainly not, in any navigational sense. But it is worth holding in mind as you look upward that even the sky you are seeing right now is subtly different from the sky your culture has named and mapped and built stories around. The constellations, if you could recognize them, would be in slightly wrong positions, their stars slightly different distances apart than your training expects. You are looking at a sky that has never been named. No human eyes have ever fallen on this particular arrangement of stars above this particular jungle. You are seeing something truly unprecedented, and it is very beautiful. The Milky Way is overhead, a band of pale luminosity that in the Jurassic night free from any artificial light source anywhere on the planet, absolutely free, for no source of artificial light has yet been invented, or will be for another 150 million years, is intensely, vividly visible. It arches from horizon to horizon with a density of starlight that modern city dwellers almost never experience. In this Jurassic night, the Milky Way casts its own faint shadow. The ground near you is lit by two light sources simultaneously, the sharp silver moonlight from the east and the softer, diffuse glow of the combined light of several 100 billion stars spread across the sky like chalk on dark cloth. The moon's relationship to the Jurassic creatures below it was primarily about light and the patterns it imposed on behavior. Many of the animals in this jungle organized some portion of their activity around the lunar cycle, not consciously, not with any awareness of what the moon was or why it did what it did, but through evolved behaviors that had been shaped over millions of generations by the predictable waxing and waning of nocturnal light. Certain insects synchronized their mating flights with the full moon, when there was enough light to find a mate but when predator vision was also compromised by the brightness. Certain small vertebrates timed their foraging differently in dark versus bright nights. The moon, in other words, was already old when the Jurassic began, and the life of the Jurassic had already had tens of millions of years to incorporate its rhythms. What did the animals of the Jurassic make of the moon? Nothing. In any cognitive sense, they did not make anything of it, but they responded to it in the ways that living things respond to the most reliable patterns in their environment. Through behavior, tuned by evolution, through bodies calibrated to its light. The ferns detect the transition from bright moonlight to the shadows of passing clouds and adjust the angle of their fronds almost imperceptibly. The insects time their wing-beat songs differently in full moon versus new moon conditions. The small mammals, we will meet them soon. Those tiny ancestors of everything furry on the modern Earth emerge from their burrows in different quantities depending on whether the moon is up or down. All of this moonlit response is happening around you right now, in this clearing, in this forest. Every organism here is living in relationship to the same moon you are looking at, the same light, the same slow arc across the sky. This is a form of kinship that crosses 150 million years of time without diminishing. You and the fern bending in the moonlight at the edge of the clearing, and the diplodocid that passed through here an hour ago, are all in this moment doing the same thing. Existing under the same moon, responding to the same light. Being organisms on the same old, patient, moonlit Earth. That kinship is not sentimental. It is biological. It is written in the chemistry of your cells and the architecture of your nervous system, both of which trace their origins to exactly the kind of life that inhabits this Jurassic jungle. The mitochondria in your cells, the tiny structures that convert food to energy, are the descendants of bacteria that were already ancient in the Jurassic. The mechanisms by which your brain processes the experience of lying still in the dark and drifting towards sleep were being worked out in the nervous systems of the small creatures moving through this forest right now. You are not a visitor from another world. You are a very late product of this world. Come back to one of its earlier evenings. The moon moves a degree or two while you are thinking about this. It is unhurried in the way that only things moving on truly astronomical timescales can be slow, continuous, inevitable. Without the character of motion, and yet undeniably moving, its light shifts by imperceptible increments across the fern-floored clearing, the shadow of the cycad trunks sweeping slowly in a long arc that will not be perceptible without watching for many minutes. The night is making its progress. The moon is making its progress. And you are making yours, moving from the bright wakefulness of the day toward whatever country your particular night is taking you to. Let the moon lead you. It has been leading things towards sleep for 4.5 billion years. It knows the route. At the base of the large conifer, at the edge of the clearing, where the roots have created a complex architecture of recessed spaces and dry overhangs in the soil, something small is moving. It has been moving for a few minutes already. Its dark, dense little body threading through the root chambers with a speed and precision that seems unlikely for something operating entirely in the dark. It surfaces briefly at the lip of one root cavity. Pauses, you can see its small sides heaving with rapid breath, and then drops its nose to the ground and follows something invisible toward the fern bank. This is Morganucodon, or something very like it. Morganucodon is among the earliest true mammals or near mammals, depending on how strictly you apply the definition known from the Jurassic fossil record. It is small enough to sit comfortably in a cupped human hand, with a pointed snout, large dark eyes, and a body covered in fur that is more complex than reptile scales, more insulating and slightly more waterproof. It is warm-blooded, not in the approximate way that some larger dinosaurs may have been warm-blooded, but in the specific, metabolically expensive way that all modern mammals are warm-blooded. Its body maintains a constant internal temperature, regardless of the ambient air temperature, burning food at a rate that would be ruinous if it weren't for the insulating properties of its fur and the extraordinary caloric density of the insects and worms it eats. Morganucodon is primarily nocturnal, and this is not coincidental. The nocturnal niche was where the mammal lineage found its Jurassic foothold, operating in a window of time when the largest dinosaurs were at rest, and the sensory advantages of mammalian biology, the excellent hearing, the sensitive whiskers, the olfactory system of spectacular resolution were most useful and least competed with. The descendants of creatures like this one will spend the next 130 million years as nocturnal, small, nervous inhabitants of a world owned by dinosaurs, and in doing so, will refine and perfect precisely the neural architecture that will allow mammals to dominate the post-dinosaur world. The long Mesozoic night was not wasted time for the mammal lineage. It was an education. The ears of Morganucodon deserve special mention. They are in the process of becoming something extraordinary. In reptiles and in the earliest synapsids, several of the bones at the back of the lower jaw serve structural functions. They connect the jaw to the skull and participate in the mechanics of biting. Over the course of tens of millions of years, these bones have been gradually reducing in their jaw function and being recruited for a new purpose: sound transmission. In Morganucodon, this transition is nearly complete. The bones that were jaw bones in its ancestors have migrated to the vicinity of the inner ear, where they now function as the malleus, incus, and stapes, the three tiny ossicles of the mammalian middle ear, capable of transmitting sound vibrations with a sensitivity and frequency range far beyond anything reptiles possess. What this means in practical terms is that Morganucodon can hear things the dinosaurs cannot. The high-frequency sounds of insects, the ultrasonic components of the wing beat patterns of small flying insects, the squeaks and rustlings of other small creatures are within Morganucodon's auditory range in ways they are not within the range of most dinosaurian predators. This gives it both a richer sensory world and a more sophisticated danger detection system. In the dark, hearing is everything, and Morganucodon's hearing is exceptional. Here is a fact about early mammals that most people find genuinely surprising. Some Jurassic mammal species were semi-aquatic, not in the specialized way of modern otters or platypuses, but in the opportunistic way of an animal willing to exploit whatever environment offers food. Fossil mammals from the Jurassic of China, in particular, show adaptations for swimming, limb proportions consistent with paddle-like use in water, tooth morphology, suggesting fish were part of the diet. The stereotype of Jurassic mammals as purely terrestrial, small, shrew-like insect hunters hiding in burrows and leaves is partially accurate, but the reality was more varied. Some of your ancient relatives were getting their feet wet in Jurassic rivers and lakes. Some of them were finding their living at the edge of water rather than in the depths of the forest. There are other small mammals in this clearing tonight, though you would have to hold very still for a long time to see them all. There is a Docodonton, another early mammal group exploring the moist zone near the edge of the drainage channel at the clearing's low point. There is a small multituberculate, a group so successful they will persist through the entire reign of the dinosaurs and into the Cenozoic, before finally being outcompeted by modern rodents, nosing through the fern litter for seeds and small invertebrates. These different mammal lineages share the clearing at night, moving through overlapping but not identical portions of the available space, exploiting overlapping but not identical food resources, organized by smell and sound, into a social geography of the night that is invisible in daylight. The multituberculates are particularly interesting because of their teeth. Unlike Morganucodon, whose teeth are relatively simple, multituberculates have developed a complex dental anatomy with multiple rows of cusps, which is where their name comes from. The many tubercled ones that allow them to process seeds and hard plant material with a grinding efficiency unusual in mammals of this period. This dietary flexibility is part of what will make them so successful. They are not locked into the insect specialist niche that constrains Morganucodon. They are generalists with a bias toward plant material, which is to say they have bet their future on a food source that is, in any productive ecosystem, essentially unlimited. All of these small animals move through the Jurassic night with a rapidity that is startling after the slow, deliberate pace of the sauropod. The mammal body plan runs hot and fast, high metabolism, rapid respiration, quick movement, where the diplodocid moved through the clearing with the unhurried pace of something with no predators. Morganucodon moves with the perpetual alertness of something that is, to many things in this forest, food. It never stops entirely. Even when it pauses to eat something, a fat beetle larva extracted from the soil beneath a fern root, it is quivering slightly, its head making small, rapid movements, sampling the air, monitoring the sounds of the forest with those exquisite ears. And yet, in its way, the small life of the Jurassic night has a quality of deep engagement with the immediate world that is not at all anxious. Morganucodon is not worried in the way that a worried person is worried. Its nervous system is not generating the low-level, abstract dread that human nervous systems are capable of producing. It is simply attending, with the full force of its extraordinary senses, to exactly what is happening right now, in this square meter of clearing edge, at this precise moment of the night. It is the most present creature imaginable. Everything it is directed toward right now. There is something in watching this small animal move through the moonlit forest that produces a very particular kind of peace. It is the peace of watching something be completely what it is, completely where it is, completely occupied by the present tense. Morganucodon has no yesterday haunting it, and no tomorrow weighing on it. It has this root cavity, this beetle larva, this particular angle of moonlight to avoid, this specific sound from the forest to pass. That's all. That, and the warm fur, and the quick heartbeat, and the extraordinary ears listening to a world that is very large and very full of information, and the small body threading through the architecture of the night's hiding places, with the casual expertise of 50 million years of evolutionary practice. Your own small mammal ancestors, something very like this creature, something with this creature's quick warm blood, and this creature's complex teeth, and this creature's sharp, curious, alert dark eyes were here tonight. Not you, but the long chain of inheritance that eventually produces you. Every mammal now living on the earth descends from creatures like these, from this same window of the Jurassic, from these same nocturnal forest margins, and this same strategy of surviving in the shadow of giants by being small and fast and smart and endlessly attentive. The Morganucodon has found something. It pauses, nose to the ground, and then begins digging with rapid front paws. The sound of it a soft scratching, the displacement of soil just audible over the insect chorus. It is going after a grub, something in the soil detected by smell and the faint vibrations of its movement. The extraction, when it comes, is efficient and without ceremony. The grub appears, is seized, and is consumed in a series of precise, rapid jaw movements that demonstrate the advanced dental anatomy in action. Then the nose goes back to the ground, and the search continues. The search always continues. That is the mammalian gift and the mammalian burden, inherited from these warm little bodies moving through this Jurassic night. The search always continues, but for now, watching it, you can put your own search down for a while. Whatever you have been looking for can wait. The night is doing its finding without any effort from you. The forest is full of life, going about its business with complete competence. You are not needed here, and that is a relief. Let the small warm lives of the Jurassic dark do their work around you. They are very good at it. They have been practicing for a very long time. The sound of the river has been part of the background since you arrived here. A continuous, gentle sound that you have been hearing without quite attending to, the way you hear your own heartbeat when you stop to notice it. It has always been there, behind the insect chorus and the movement of the canopy, and the deep percussion of the sauropods' passage. But now, as you move quietly through the fern bank at the clearing's edge and follow the drainage channel down through a gradual slope of about 30 meters, the river becomes the foreground sound, becomes the thing you are walking toward, and it grows from background into something present and particular and entirely its own, the Jurassic River. This one is perhaps 15 meters wide at this section, running over a bed of polished stones with a steady, unhurried current. The water is darker than you might expect, not murky, not turbid, but a deep brownish clear, the color of strong tea held up to the light, tinted by the tannins of the enormous quantities of conifer needles and fern material that fall into the watershed. In daylight, this water would be amber-tinted, beautiful in the particular way of forest water everywhere. In the moonlight, it is simply dark and moving, its surface catching the light in irregular flashes where the current breaks over stones and creates brief, complex interference patterns of light. You settle at the bank. The stones here are smooth and rounded, shaped by centuries of current, and they hold the warmth of the day with a residual heat that you can feel on the backs of your hands when you place them against the river stones. The air near the water is several degrees cooler than the air in the clearing, the evaporative cooling of a moving water surface working continuously, drawing heat from the surrounding air and exchanging it for moisture. The moisture here is different from the general humidity of the jungle. It is more immediate, more particular. You can feel individual drops of it settling on the skin of your arms and the back of your neck, condensing from the slightly supersaturated air that rises from the water. The river has animals in it. Of course it does. Jurassic rivers were, by any biological measure, thriving ecosystems, full of life at every scale. But the animals of the Jurassic River are not quite the ones you might imagine. There are fish. There are always fish in any freshwater system with adequate food and oxygen, but they are not the kinds of fish you would recognize from a modern stream. The early actinopterygians, ray-finned fish, were already diverse in the Jurassic, but their Jurassic forms were different enough from their modern descendants to constitute a somewhat alien catalogue of shapes and behaviors. Some were sleek and fast, adapted for pursuit in open water. Others were armored and bottom-dwelling, adapted for rooting through the silt of the riverbed for invertebrates. There are also other things in this water, things with legs. Early aquatic reptiles, not the marine ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs of the open sea, but their freshwater relatives and contemporaries, small crocodile-line animals, and various semi-aquatic archosaurs that split their time between river margin and open water. You can occasionally see the surface of the water disturb in a way that suggests something moving just below the surface, not large, perhaps a meter long, making its way upstream along the bottom in pursuit of fish or invertebrates. The crocodilians here deserve their own moment, because they are simultaneously ancient and unfamiliar. Crocodiles, in the form familiar from modern rivers, have existed since approximately the early Jurassic, which is to say they have been doing essentially what they do now for nearly as long as the Jurassic itself has existed. The basic plan, the low, flattened body, the powerful tail, the eyes and nostrils positioned at the top of the skull for semi-submersion, the armored skin is a plan so successful that it required virtually no modification over 150 million years of subsequent time. What you are looking at near the far bank of the river, a long pale shape half in the water and half on the gravel strand, is recognizably a crocodilian. But here is the fact that most people do not know about Jurassic crocodilians. They were not all aquatic, not even most of them. The Jurassic crocodilian family tree included many terrestrial species, animals that walked upright on longer, more vertical legs than modern crocodiles, animals that were predators in the forest, understory rather than in rivers and lakes. Some were fast runners. Some were social animals that left communal track sites in Jurassic sediments. One group, the Notosuchians, would develop herbivorous habits in the Cretaceous, filling ecological niches that in modern ecosystems would be occupied by small ungulates or pigs. The semi-aquatic, ambush predator crocodilian we think of as the ancestral type was, in the Jurassic, just one strategy among many available to a diverse and successful group. The one on the gravel strand has been watching you since you arrived at the bank. You can tell by the position of its head, slightly raised, oriented toward you, the eyes unblinking in that particular way of reptilian patience. It is not alarmed. It does not consider you a threat or a potential meal. You are simply a novel element in its environment, and it is assessing you with the methodical attention of an animal that has no particular hurry and nothing particularly better to do at this moment. Its tail is curled slightly to one side, its legs folded in a comfortable resting posture. In a few minutes, if you remain still, it will lower its head back to the gravel and close its eyes, returning to whatever the crocodilian equivalent of sleep looks like. The actual sound of the river, listened to properly, is not one sound but many. There is the main channel sound, a continuous ripple and rush over the middle stones, a sound that has a slight but real frequency variation as different features of the riverbed shape the current in different ways. There are the edge sounds, where the bank creates small eddies and the water slaps irregularly against the stones. There is the deeper sound, barely audible, of something larger moving along the riverbed, not a rock tumbling, but the constant settling and resettling of fine sediment that a river never stops doing. And there is the sound of the air above the river, which is different from the air above the forest. Cooler, more regular in its movement as the temperature differential between water and land creates a predictable local airflow. All of these sounds together form what acoustic ecologists call a soundscape. A complex, layered, continuously varying audio environment that is experienced as a whole, even as its components are distinguishable on close attention. The soundscape of the Jurassic River at midnight is dominated by water, but not only water. The insects here have a different character from the insects of the clearing more aquatic-associated species, the ancestors of caddisflies and mayflies, whose larval stages are spent in the water, and whose adult forms emerge at night to mate in clouds above the water surface, creating a faint, luminous haze over certain stretches of the river where the moonlight catches thousands of small wings simultaneously. Here is something about these aquatic insects that surprises almost everyone who hears it. The ancestors of modern aquatic insects were active in the Jurassic in very large numbers, and their larval stages, the forms that lived in the water before metamorphosing into flying adults, were an enormously important food resource for fish, for small crocodilians, for amphibians. The food web of the Jurassic River was built on insect larvae, in much the same way that modern river food webs are built on insect larvae. This is a biological pattern so successful, so stable, that it has persisted through the extinction of the non-avian dinosaurs, through multiple ice ages, through all of geological time since the Jurassic, without significant alteration. The river food web you are looking at tonight is, in its essential architecture, the same food web operating in rivers around the world right now. There is a sound from the far bank that stops you, a sound that is not river and not insect. It is larger than both. A slow, liquid movement in the vegetation at the waterline on the far side, and then a soft splash, and then nothing for several seconds, and then the sound of something entering the water from the far bank and swimming. Not frantically but with a steady purpose, across the current. Whatever it is reaches the near bank, perhaps 15 meters upstream of where you are sitting, and hauls itself out onto the gravel with the particular awkward grace of an animal more at home in the water than on land. It shakes its head. You hear the spray of water droplets hitting stone. You cannot see it clearly enough in the shadow of the far bank's overhang to make a confident identification. It is roughly the size of a large dog. Its limbs, as it moves up the gravel and back into the forest margin, show the slightly splayed pattern of an animal more built for water than for extended terrestrial travel. You hear it moving through the vegetation for a few seconds after it disappears from view, and then the sounds of it are absorbed into the general sounds of the forest, and the riverbank is quiet again except for the water. The river is crossing time in its own way. Every drop of water in this river was water before the river existed. It came from rain, which came from ocean evaporation, which came from ocean water that has been cycling through the atmosphere and the land surface for billions of years. The water moving past you right now has been in countless other configurations, has been ice in polar regions that no longer exist in their current forms, has been dissolved in ocean water above coral reefs that are now limestone mountains, has been vapor in clouds that released as rain over carboniferous swamp forests 100 million years before the Jurassic began. Water has no beginning and no end, only the continuous recycling of its own ancient body through the available forms. The sound of it is one of the oldest sounds available to any human ear. It predates all language. It predates the mammal lineage entirely. It is the sound of water doing what water does, finding its level, following gravity, yielding to whatever surfaces it encounters, making of every obstacle a song. Rivers were making this sound before the first lung-bearing fish dragged itself onto land. They will be making it long after whatever comes after us has come and gone. Let the sound of the Jurassic River carry you a little further towards sleep. It is moving in one direction, and that direction is always forward, and forward is always away from the business of the day and closer to the country of rest. The water has no difficulty moving forward. It never hesitates. It never wonders if it is going the right way. It simply follows what it follows and arrives where it arrives, and does not ask the arrival to be different from what it is. You can do that too. For tonight, for right now, simply follow what is carrying you forward, and let the river's continuous, unconcerned motion show you that it is possible to move through the night without effort, without resistance, without needing to know where the water goes after the bend. You will see it first as a silhouette against the Milky Way, a shape that is wrong for any bird you have ever seen, moving wrong for anything in your experience of flying things, and yet undeniably, gracefully, expertly airborne. It crosses perhaps a third of the visible sky in a single long glide that takes it from the forest edge to the open air above the river in about 8 seconds. And then it banks on a wingtip, a single wingtip, held out like a finger testing the wind, and curves back, and is gone above the canopy on the far side of the river before you can fully compose what you are seeing, a pterosaur. One of the flying reptiles that share the Jurassic sky with the earliest birds, that conquered the air 50 million years before any bird evolved, that will hold their position as the dominant flying vertebrates until the very end of the Cretaceous. They are not dinosaurs technically, they are the sister group of the dinosaurs, a lineage that diverged from the common ancestor sometime in the Triassic and immediately went, with all the enthusiasm of evolutionary novelty, into the air. By the Jurassic, they have been flying for at least 50 million years and have had ample time to diversify into dozens of forms suited to dozens of aerial niches. The one you just saw, the long gliding silhouette, the curved back wing, the slightly trailing tail that distinguishes many Jurassic pterosaurs from their later, tailless Cretaceous relatives was probably a rhamphorhynchid, a group that will persist through the entire Jurassic and into the early Cretaceous before being replaced by the larger, more advanced pterodactyloids. Rhamphorhynchus itself had a wingspan of about 1 to 2 meters and a long, stiff tail with a diamond-shaped vein at the end, a structure whose function is still debated. It may have been a flight stabilizer, it may have been a display structure, it may have served both purposes depending on context. Fossil specimens of rhamphorhynchids are known with remarkable completeness, sometimes preserving soft tissue impressions of the wing membrane and the hair-like pycnofibers that covered their bodies. The pycnofibers are one of the most consistently underappreciated facts about pterosaurs. These structures' fine, filament-like coverings, found preserved in pterosaur fossils from several Jurassic and Cretaceous sites, are evidence that pterosaurs were not the leathery-winged, cold, scaly creatures of older reconstructions. They were fluffy, warm-looking, covered in something between fur and down, which provided insulation consistent with elevated body temperatures and a fundamentally different physiology from the cold-blooded reptiles they are often grouped with in popular imagination. Whether pterosaurs were fully endothermic, warm-blooded in the mammalian sense, is still debated. But they were almost certainly more physiologically active than any modern cold-blooded reptile. They had to be. Powered flight is metabolically expensive beyond the capacity of a truly cold-blooded physiology. The pterosaur returns. This time it comes lower, skimming the river surface in a flight path that is both functional and beautiful. Its jaw is open slightly, the teeth angled forward in a way that suggests it is hunting, dragging its lower jaw through the top centimeters of the river to scoop small fish or surface invertebrates. This technique, called skim feeding, is used today by certain specialized seabirds, and when you see the pterosaur doing it in the moonlight, the motion is so fluid, so perfectly calibrated to the surface of the water, that the whole behavior seems to have been designed by someone who cared about elegance as much as efficiency. The fourth finger of the wing deserves attention. Pterosaur flight worked on a completely different anatomical plan from bird flight. Rather than the flight feathers attached to fused fingers of a bird's wing, the pterosaur wing membrane was supported primarily by a single, enormously elongated fourth finger that could be as long as 5 times the length of the other fingers. This finger was a living spar, strong and lightweight, around which the wing membrane attached, and which determined the wing's shape and camber in flight. The other 3 fingers remained free, small, clawed, used for clinging to surfaces when the animal was not flying. On the ground, pterosaurs probably walked on all fours, the wingtip finger folded back along the arm, the 3 free fingers bearing weight. What would the inside of a pterosaur's experience of flight be like? This is a question that can never be answered with certainty, but the anatomy suggests some things. Their brains, known from endocasts made of the cranial cavity inside the fossil skull, were relatively large and showed particularly well-developed optic lobes and flocculi, the regions associated with visual processing and the fine motor coordination of balance and movement. A flying pterosaur's brain was doing something sophisticated, integrating continuous visual information with proprioceptive signals from the wing membrane, adjusting the position of the limbs and tail in real time to maintain stability and direction. It was, in whatever sense the word applies to a Jurassic reptile brain, paying attention in a focused and continuous way. Now comes something that very few people know. The earliest feathered dinosaur that we have clear evidence for, Anchiornis huxleyi, lived in the late Jurassic, predating Archaeopteryx by a few million years. Anchiornis was not a bird in the modern sense. It was a small Paravian dinosaur, more closely related to the lineage that would produce birds than to the lineage of large theropods, and it had feathers on all 4 of its limbs, not just the forelimbs, but the hind limbs as well, creating a 4-winged appearance that has been reconstructed with remarkable detail from exquisitely preserved Chinese specimens. Its color pattern, derived from the shape and arrangement of melanosomes preserved in the fossil feathers, has been analyzed and reconstructed. Black and white with a rusty red crown, making it more colorful than many people assume Jurassic dinosaurs could have been. Is Anchiornis flying tonight? Probably not, or not in the full sense. The 4-winged design it carries may have been more suited to gliding and parachuting from elevated positions than to sustained powered flight, but it would have been capable of impressive aerial maneuvers, and in a forest with vertical structure, with the tall conifers providing the high starting points necessary for gliding, it would have been a regular presence in the canopy at dusk and dawn. Whether it was active at night is unknown. Its eye size, estimated from the preserved scleral ring bones inside the eye socket, suggests relatively good vision in low-light conditions, which might indicate crepuscular or nocturnal habits. Or it might simply indicate that the early evolutionary experiments with feathered flight involved a lot of jumping off things at whatever hour opportunity presented itself. Above the river, other things move in the night air. True flying insects, beetles, proto-moths, various ancestral forms whose descendants have names cross the patches of moonlight with their characteristic jitter flight, the slightly erratic trajectory that powered insect flight produces at low speeds. Some are large by modern standards. The higher oxygen levels of the Jurassic atmosphere allowed insects to grow somewhat larger than their modern counterparts, and some of the beetles here have bodies 3 or 4 centimeters long, their wing cases catching the moonlight as they bank and correct and bank again over the water. These insects are what the pterosaur is hunting. It comes through again, lower than before, and this time you hear very faintly the snap of its jaws closing on something, and then it climbs back into the dark above the canopy, with the slightly altered wing loading of an animal that has added a small weight to its trajectory. The air above the Jurassic River at midnight is three-dimensional in the way that only fully occupied airspace can be, vertically layered, with different animals at different heights for different purposes, with the pterosaurs in the middle zone between river surface and canopy top, with insects at every level from a few centimeters above the water to the tops of the conifers, with the occasional Anchiornis moving through the lower canopy zone on whatever business brings it down from the upper tree levels. All of this life is in motion, and the motion is continuous, and it has no particular crisis or urgency attached to it. It is simply the normal air of a Jurassic midnight, doing what Jurassic air does. The Rhamphorhynchid makes one more low pass and then climbs, using an updraft rising from the warmer forest air on the near bank, riding it in a long ascending spiral that takes it above the canopy in perhaps 30 seconds. You watch until it is a silhouette against the brightest part of the Milky Way, and then it fades into the texture of the stars and is gone. The river continues. The insects continue. The air above the water moves in the small, irregular patterns of a night without wind, disturbed only by the passage of wings and the occasional rise of warmer air from the warmer forest edge. There is a question worth sitting with here. One of those questions that the natural world generates simply by existing. What would it be like to live in 3 dimensions the way a pterosaur does? To make that bank on a single wingtip and feel the whole world pivot around the point of contact between wing membrane and moving air? To hunt by skimming the moonlit surface of an ancient river and feel the jaw close on something alive, and then carry that life upward into the dark? We can observe the mechanics of this. We can measure the wing loading and calculate the bank angles and estimate the visual acuity required to spot a small fish from 15 meters up in low light. But the experience itself, what it is like to be that membrane, that outstretched fourth finger, that small, careful brain navigating the night in 3 directions at once, that is something we cannot reach. And perhaps that is exactly right. Some things should remain on the far side of knowledge. Visible but unreachable. Understood in outline but not in detail. The pterosaur banks above the river and is gone into the dark and does not require our understanding of what it is like to bank and be gone. It simply goes. And that going, that silhouette across the Milky Way, that brief clean shape against the ancient light is enough. It is more than enough. It is, in fact, one of the most precise gifts this night has to offer. The sight of something moving perfectly through its own world, without confusion, without doubt, doing exactly what it has been shaped by 50 million years of practice to do. Let that image stay with you as you settle deeper into this night. The wing against the stars. The bank on a wingtip. The smooth, continuous going of something that knows exactly where it is and exactly what it is doing and has not once, in its entire life, wondered if it was doing it right. If sleep is finding you now, let it. This is exactly what this is for. There is more to come, more of this jungle, more of this ancient night, more of the extraordinary life moving through it, but it will be here whenever you return. Subscribe so the next story is waiting when you need it. Sleep well, if sleep has come. The ancient smell of rain. There is a change in the air. It is subtle enough that you might not notice it immediately. More a feeling than a perception, a slight shift in the quality of what your skin is touching, a marginal increase in the weight of the air against your face. And then, from somewhere very far away, so far away, it is barely sound at all, a low roll of thunder. Not the sharp crack of a nearby strike, but something more like a suggestion of sound, a deepening of the ambient silence that you notice only because you are very still. Rain is coming. In the Jurassic world, rain is not an interruption of the normal order of things. It is the normal order of things. The Jurassic climate, driven by warm oceans, high atmospheric carbon dioxide, and the particular configuration of the breaking supercontinent, was a wet climate by any global standard. Precipitation was not occasional or seasonal in the way it is in many modern temperate zones. In the tropical and subtropical regions of the Jurassic world, rain came frequently, sometimes daily, in the form of afternoon and evening convective storms that built in the intense heat of the day and broke in the late afternoon or evening. Tonight's storm is one of those, a convective cell that built through the afternoon hours over the warming interior and is now moving toward the coast, crossing the jungle in the slow way that large weather systems cross landscapes when there is nothing to divert them. The first drops arrive gently. This is always true of Jurassic rain. The opening of a storm here is quiet, thoughtful almost. Individual large drops falling through the canopy and hitting the fern fronds with a sound like cards being placed one by one on a table. Each drop that hits a fern sends a small cascade of smaller drops falling from the frond below, so that the rainfall, by the time it reaches the forest floor, has already been filtered through several canopy layers and arrives broken into smaller increments. The first rain you feel on your skin is not the original rain at all, but a secondary rain, a forest-created version, smaller in individual drop size, and slightly warmer from its passage through the humid air of the understory. The smell that comes with rain is called petrichor. It is one of the most universal sensory experiences available to land-dwelling life. The specific combination of ozone from lightning discharge, of geosmin produced by soil bacteria, of plant oils disturbed by water, that human beings and many other animals experience as the smell of incoming or recent rain. Here in the Jurassic, petrichor exists in a slightly different chemical formulation. The soil bacteria are ancient relatives of their modern descendants. The plant oils are from conifers and cycads rather than the angiosperms that will eventually add their own aromatic contribution. The specific proportion of geosmin to other compounds is slightly different, but the overall character of the smell would be recognizable to any nose that has ever turned upward at the arrival of rain. It is old enough to be ancestral. It is, perhaps, the oldest recognizable smell available to a mammalian nose. The Jurassic atmosphere had a carbon dioxide concentration roughly 3 to 5 times higher than the atmosphere you normally breathe. This is one of those facts that is difficult to feel emotionally, because it does not translate into an obvious physical experience when you are simply standing in the jungle breathing. But its effects are everywhere in the extraordinary density and height of the vegetation, in the warmth of the air at night, in the particular pace of the water cycle that is bringing this rain toward you right now. High CO2 drove vigorous photosynthesis, which drove vigorous plant growth, which drove the enormous biomass of the Jurassic forest, which drove the enormous herbivore populations, which drove the large predator populations. Everything here, the size of the sauropods and the density of the fern understory and the frequency of rain, is downstream of that elevated CO2. And this is one of those places where the deep past whispers something to the present that is worth sitting with. The processes that created the Jurassic greenhouse volcanic outgassing over millions of years are not fundamentally different in kind from the processes that are shifting the modern atmosphere. The difference is speed. The Jurassic greenhouse built slowly, over geological time spans, allowing life to adapt by the ordinary mechanisms of evolutionary selection. What is happening in the modern atmosphere is, in geological terms, extraordinarily rapid changes that would normally take millions of years are occurring within centuries. The Jurassic shows us what a greenhouse world looks like in full flower, lush and warm and wet and teeming. It also shows us the extinction events that preceded that lushness, the disruptions that rapid climate change, as opposed to slow change, can cause. Both things are true simultaneously, but tonight, in the Jurassic, The rain is simply rain. It does not carry a message. It carries water, which is more than sufficient. The individual drops are arriving more frequently now, the initial scattered rhythm building towards something denser. And across the clearing, you can see the pattern of the rain on the fern canopy, a soft, moving dimpling of the upper frond surfaces, a collective shiver that passes through the clearing in waves as the gusts preceding the storm front arrive and pass. The response of the jungle to rain is immediate and total. The ferns open slightly, their frond angles adjusting to catch the incoming water and channel it toward the root zone. The moss mats on the forest floor, which have been waiting for this, begin to visibly swell and darken, the individual moss plants absorbing water through their entire surface area, with a speed that makes them look like small, slow explosions of green. The fungi at the base of the old conifer trunk, pale, bracket-shaped structures that have been living there for years, feeding on the tree's slow decline, take on a glistening quality, their surfaces beading with water and reflecting the moonlight in a way that makes them seem to glow from within. The insect sounds change. Some of the proto-crickets go quiet, their rhythm disrupted by the rain's arrival. But other insects become more active, the ancestors of beetles that are associated with wet conditions. Various flying forms that prefer the humid, electrically charged air that precedes and accompanies storms. Over the river, which you can still hear even under the growing sound of rain, the caddisfly ancestors are performing their moon and rain-triggered mating flight with increased intensity, thousands of small wings, making a faint collective hum that is audible only because you have been trained by the quiet of the night to hear very small sounds. The rain is coming properly now. It is not yet what will become a downpour. The storm's center is still some distance away, but it is no longer tentative. The drops fall steadily, rhythmically, each one a small percussion note against leaf and frond, and the polished river stones visible from the bank. The sound of it, distributed across the whole canopy and all the surfaces of the forest, becomes a continuous wash of white sound, a gentle static that is not quite silence but functions like silence in its effect on the nervous system, absorbing and neutralizing the individual sounds that would otherwise claim attention, smoothing the perceptual environment into something consistent and tonally narrow and deeply, physically relaxing. Rain sound is one of the most reliable sleep aids available to the human nervous system, and this is almost certainly not a coincidence. The earliest mammals, in their nocturnal lives, would have associated rain with a reduction in threat. Many predators, particularly those that relied on auditory cues for hunting, were less effective in rain. Rain-masked sounds, rain-covered tracks and scent trails. Rain reduced the visibility and activity range of large visual predators. For a small mammal trying to survive the Jurassic night, rain was a kind of protective camouflage of sound. The instinct to relax when rain begins to feel the particular settledness that comes with the sound of rain on a roof or rain on leaves may have its roots in exactly this ancient Jurassic logic. You are dry under the overhang of the large conifer's lower branches, which have created a natural shelter where the canopy is dense enough to intercept most of the incoming water. The smell here under the tree is different from the open forest smell, more concentrated resin, the sharp woody smell of the bark directly behind you, and now, adding to it, the petrichor rising from the soaked ferns a few meters away at the clearing edge. You are enclosed, the branches above you, the root cavities to your side, the rain curtaining the open space beyond these things together, create a sense of enclosure that is not claustrophobic, but sheltering, not constraining but held. This is a feeling so old, it has no words for it. Not the Jurassic mammal's feeling, not any particular animal's feeling, but a feeling that is shared across every warm, small, soft-bodied animal that has ever found a dry place in a wet night and settled into it. The relief of shelter, the particular physical ease of being somewhere protected while the larger world does something dramatic just beyond the edge of your protection. You do not need to be in the rain. The rain is not for you. You have your dry ground, and your resin smell, and your root cavity, and your soft fern mat, and the rain is out there being rain, and the night is proceeding. Amber is forming out there in the rain, not from this rain, exactly, and not from any single night's rain, but from the general wet conditions of the Jurassic forest, the high humidity that keeps resin flowing, the rain that occasionally washes fresh resin down from high branches and deposits it in low-lying accumulations where it can remain moist enough to trap things. Over thousands of years, some of this resin will harden, and over millions of years, that hardened resin will become amber. And within some of that amber, a beetle's wing, a fragment of fern frond, a spider's silk thread, an air bubble containing actual Jurassic air, sealed and kept for 150 million years against the moment when someone figures out how to analyze it. Someone did figure out how to analyze it, eventually. Scientists have extracted gases from Jurassic amber bubbles and measured their composition. They have confirmed that the Jurassic atmosphere was higher in oxygen than the present day's in some periods, and higher in CO2. They have found ancient biological markers in the trapped material chemical signatures of plants and animals that are long extinct. The amber is a record the forest kept without knowing it was keeping it, a memory in resin that has outlasted everything else the Jurassic had to say about itself. The rain gentles. The storm center has passed to the north of here, moving through the heavier forest without losing its intensity. But here at the edge of the clearing, the falling has reduced to a fine, persistent drizzle that is more mist than rain. The sound of it is softer now, a whisper rather than a statement. The moonlight, passing through the cloud's trailing edge, is refracted and diffused, and comes through as a general luminosity rather than direct silver light, the world lit evenly from everywhere at once, without shadow, gentle and flat and soft as a breath. Rest in the after-rain, rest in the smell of wet stone and saturated moss, and the ancient forest breathing. The rain was never trying to disturb you. It was just doing what it does, as it has done, in forms more or less like this. For as long as there has been water on Earth and air above it to hold and release it, it is one of the oldest processes available for witnessing. Let it carry you down into the quiet it has been building since the first drop fell. The Jurassic night has its predators. Of course it does. Every ecosystem that has ever existed has had its predators, its hunters, its animals, designed by the long process of natural selection to find and consume other animals. Without predators, herbivore populations would grow unchecked until they consumed all available plant material and collapsed their own food base. The predators are not villains in this story. They are a structural necessity, as much a part of the forest's biological health as the roots that hold the soil or the fungi that recycle dead matter. They are, in their way, the forest's own system of regulation. The large theropods, the allosaurs and ceratosaurs that occupy the apex predator positions in the late Jurassic food web are not, for the most part, active tonight. This is one of those facts about Jurassic predator biology that surprises people. The large theropods were probably not predominantly nocturnal hunters. The eye sockets of large theropods like Allosaurus are relatively small in proportion to the skull, suggesting visual organs more suited to daylight than darkness. The scleral ring bones, the small bones that support the eye in reptiles and birds, and which paleontologists use to estimate eye size in large theropods like Allosaurus, indicate eyes sized for diurnal activity, for hunting in the clear light of a Jurassic day. What this means for the Jurassic night is not that large predators are absent from the darkness they are present, resting, their metabolic fires banked in the way of animals that do not need to be continuously active to maintain themselves, but that the active hunters of the Jurassic night are smaller, more diverse, more varied in their methods. The night hunters are the mid-sized and small theropods, the crocodilians, the early mammals pursuing insect prey, and the aquatic predators working the rivers and lakes in the dark. The mid-sized theropods are perhaps the most interesting. Animals like the small coelophysoids, slender, bipedal, fast, with jaws lined with small, sharp teeth that suggested a diet of small to medium-sized prey, showed eye socket proportions more consistent with crepuscular or nocturnal activity than the large allosaurs. There is a hypothesis, well supported by anatomical evidence, that the smaller theropods of the Jurassic divided the hunting day and night between themselves and their larger relatives, with the large allosaurs hunting the great sauropod herbivores in daylight, and the smaller coelophysoids taking over the nocturnal hunting of smaller prey. Tonight, such a hunter is near. You become aware of it not by sight, but by the response of the insect chorus to its presence. The way the insect sounds in a particular zone of the forest edge reduce slightly. The way the fern fronds on the forest margin are very still in a place where they should be moving with the slight breeze. And then, as your eyes adjust to the particular quality of the post-rain moonlight, you see the shape of it, a small dinosaur, perhaps 1.5 meters long, standing absolutely motionless at the edge of the tree line where the clearing meets the forest. It is watching. This is what small predators do most of the time. They watch. The investment of energy in a chase that fails is significant for a small animal, and the Jurassic theropods were specialists in patience, watching from concealment until a target came within the range where a chase could be short, direct, and efficient. This particular hunter has been watching the fern bank at the clearing edge for some minutes, aware of the small mammals moving through the root zone beneath the ferns, calculating in whatever way a Jurassic theropod brain calculates whether the energy expenditure of a pursuit is justified by the probable caloric yield. The patience is extraordinary. The animal does not move, does not shift its weight, does not betray its presence by any unnecessary motion for what must be 5 minutes. It has seen you. Certainly its binocular vision is forward-facing in the manner of a predator, and you are within its visual field. But you are very still, and you are large enough that you are probably not being assessed as prey, and the mammal under the ferns is exactly the right size to be interesting. The predator's attention is narrowed to a particular point, a specific zone of root and fern, and dark soil where the mammal is working. The small theropods of the Jurassic were, recent research suggests, likely capable of a hunting behavior that was more nuanced than simply chasing something down. There is evidence in the tooth marks on fossil bones, in the arrangement of prey remains in fossil localities that some small theropods engaged in cooperative, or at least coordinated hunting, working in groups to manage prey that might be difficult for a single individual. Track sites from the Jurassic show multiple small theropods moving together in parallel or converging paths that suggest group behavior. We cannot know from tracks alone whether this group behavior extended to coordinated predation, but the anatomy is consistent with it forward-facing eyes providing binocular depth perception, a brain with relatively developed spatial reasoning relative to body size, limbs built for agile, directional motion in cluttered environments. The hunt here tonight, if it comes, will be small and quiet. A brief chase through fern roots, a moment of speed, a smaller creature taken quickly and without ceremony into the body of the predator that found it. This is not a dramatic event in the emotional register of human storytelling. It is simply the food chain working, the caloric transfer that keeps the Jurassic night in biological motion. Everything here that is alive partly at the expense of something else that was alive. Everything that eats has been eaten, or will be, or descended from things that were and will be. While the small theropod maintains its patient vigil, something else is happening at the far edge of the forest, something you can just detect, as a very slight vibration transmitted through the roots of the conifer against your back. A deep, irregular percussion that is different from the sauropod's movement. This is larger. This is an Allosaurus, or something very like it. Moving through the dense forest, perhaps 200 meters from where you are sitting. Not hunting right now, moving the way large predators move when they are between hunting episodes, covering ground, patrolling territory, following routes established by months or years of nightly movement through this forest. Allosaurus was the dominant large theropod of the late Jurassic of North America and a close relative of animals that occupied the same ecological role in Europe and Africa and Asia. It was approximately 8 to 12 meters long, depending on age and individual, with a skull designed for a particular style of predation that differed from its later relative Tyrannosaurus in an important way. Where T-Rex used its enormously powerful jaws for crushing bone, Allosaurus had a more lightly built skull that was likely used in a hatchet-like striking motion, driving the upper jaw into prey with the force of the neck muscles rather than closing the jaws with the full power of the jaw muscles alone. This style of predation required speed and accuracy rather than pure bite force. Here is one of the facts that most reliably surprises people who think carefully about Jurassic time. Allosaurus and Stegosaurus lived at the same time. Not just the same period, the same time, the same places, the same forests and plains and river margins. Their fossil remains are found together, in the same geological formations, in what was once the same landscape. Stegosaurus, with those famous plates and that spike-armed tail, was not a creature of some vague ancient past relative to Allosaurus. It was Allosaurus's contemporary. They were neighbors. They encountered each other in exactly the kind of forest you are sitting in right now. More strikingly, Stegosaurus is temporally closer to Allosaurus than it is to Tyrannosaurus rex. Stegosaurus and Allosaurus shared the late Jurassic, roughly 150 million years ago. T-Rex lived in the late Cretaceous, roughly 66 million years ago. That means Stegosaurus was more recently extinct when Allosaurus was alive than Allosaurus was when T-Rex was alive. And both of them, all three of them, lived closer to our own time than to the beginning of the Triassic when the first dinosaurs appeared. This is the temporal compression of deep time, and it plays strange tricks on intuition. The Allosaurus moving through the forest to your north does not know any of this. It knows the forest. It knows the roots through it that its muscles have learned through years of use. It knows the smell of sauropods on certain trails, the particular scent that means a large herbivore has passed within the last hour or two, the directional gradient that tells it where the trail leads and whether pursuit is likely to yield results. It knows hunger and its absence. It knows the specific quality of the air that comes off the river, which tells it something about what has been using the river at this time of night. It is operating with a brain that is large by dinosaurian standards, with frontal lobes capable of something approaching spatial planning and learned root memory, but without the self-awareness, the abstraction, the temporal displacement that characterizes human consciousness. And yet, watching it move, you cannot see it, only infer it from the vibrations and the slight distant displacement of sounds in the forest. There is something in the quality of its movement that is not purely mechanical. There is something that looks, from the outside, like intention, like a mind that is somewhere it has chosen to be, doing something it has chosen to do, moving through a forest that it knows and is known by. The distinction between intention as we use the word and whatever is happening in an Allosaurus brain on a Jurassic night may be less sharp than philosophy would prefer. The small theropod at the clearing edge still has not moved. Whatever it was watching under the fern roots has apparently stilled, sensing the predator's presence in some way. The forest holds its patience. You hold yours. The night holds its breath in the particular way that forest nights hold their breath when large predators are moving nearby, a collective, biological pause in which every prey animal's nervous system is cued toward attention. And then the pause releases. The Allosaurus has passed. Its path carried it north of the clearing without deviation, following whatever route it was following before your presence registered, and now the sounds of the forest rebuild themselves in its wake. The insects resuming, the small movements recommencing, the general hum of nocturnal life reasserting itself over the brief interruption of predator presence. The small theropod at the clearing edge shifts its weight, looks once more at the fern bank, and then turns and walks quietly back into the forest, unhurried, unhurried, unhurried. The jungle breathes again. You breathe again, not from fear. You were never in danger here. Not really, but in the way that any enclosed space releases its held breath when something large and decisive and unfathomable has passed through and moved on. The night resumes its normal volume. The ferns at the clearing edge begin their slow return to motion. The moonlight, unchanged and indifferent, continues its silver passage across the wet leaves and the dark soil, and the face of anyone still awake and watching. There is a beetle on the back of your hand. You notice it because it is large enough to feel not heavy exactly, but present, its 6 legs making a barely perceptible sensation as it navigates the topography of your knuckles. In the moonlight, you can see it clearly. A dark-bodied creature, perhaps 2 centimeters long, its wing cases, the elytra gleaming with a quality between brown and black that absorbs and returns the light in a way that has no single color name. Its antennae move with a rapid, purposeful thoroughness, sampling the chemical information in the air and the surface it is exploring. It is investigating you the way beetles investigate everything, which is to say thoroughly and without apparent emotional investment. This beetle is going to live for perhaps a few weeks, or a few months, if it is one of the longer-lived species. In that time it will eat, and find a mate, and deposit eggs in whatever substrate is appropriate to its species' reproductive strategy. And then it will die. Its individual passage through this Jurassic night will leave no mark, no memory, No descendant that remembers being it. And yet, if it wanders across the wrong patch of fresh resin on the conifer trunk behind you, a thing that is entirely possible, that happens to beetles in this forest on a statistical basis that implies it will happen to some beetle, somewhere, on any given night, then its body will be enclosed in that resin, will be sealed from decay and oxygen, will be carried slowly, over millions of years of geological pressure and chemical transformation, from something living to something immortal. Amber insects, the frozen passengers, the most intimate record of Jurassic life that exists anywhere in the world. The amber deposits found in France, in Lebanon, in Myanmar, in the Baltic, contain within them something that no fossil bone can provide: the texture of life. The actual hair on an insect's leg, the facets of its compound eye, individually distinguishable under a microscope, the silken remnants of a spider's web, the pollen grains stuck to the body of a flower-visiting insect, though this is Jurassic amber. And there were no flowers yet. So the pollen here is conifer pollen, released in clouds from the male cones of the trees above. The insects of the Jurassic night are not the insects of any modern night, but they are not entirely unrecognizable either. The fundamental insect body plan: head, thorax, abdomen, 6 legs, compound eyes, antennae, was established long before the Jurassic began, and will persist long after it ends. What varies is the specific expression of that body plan: the wing venation, the mouthpart structure, the leg modifications, the particular proportions that evolution has settled on for solving a specific ecological problem in a specific ecological context. Looking at Jurassic insects is like looking at photographs of your own family from 4 or 5 generations back. The family resemblance is unmistakable, but the specific faces are ones you have never seen before. The beetles are among the most diverse insect groups in this Jurassic forest, as they are in every forest from the Jurassic to the present day. There is a reason that when the biologist J.B.S. Pross Haldane was asked what the study of nature had revealed to him about the character of God, he reportedly replied that God seemed to have an inordinate fondness for beetles. Beetles, the order Coleoptera, represent approximately 40% of all described insect species, and somewhere between 25 and 40% of all animal species on Earth. They have achieved this through their characteristic combination of the hardened wing case, the elytra, which protects the flying wings beneath and allows beetles to exploit microhabitats that would damage the wings of other insects, and their extraordinary dietary flexibility, which has produced species capable of eating nearly every organic substance available on land. In the Jurassic, the diversification of beetles into wood-boring, bark-feeding, fungus-eating, predatory, and scavenging ecological roles was already well underway. Some of the beetle species in this forest tonight will leave descendants that are still identifiable to family level in the modern fauna. Others will go extinct, leaving their shapes preserved only in amber, their specific ways of moving through the world recorded only in the occasional lucky entombment that sealed them against decay for geological time. The amber remembers what the living forest has long since forgotten. There are flies here too, not the highly derived flies of the modern world, but protodipterans, early members of the fly order, whose descendants will eventually become among the most significant insects on the planet in terms of their ecological role as pollinators, decomposers, and nutrient cyclers. In the Jurassic, flies are present but not yet dominant in most forest ecosystems. They are working out the evolutionary kinks of a lifestyle built on rapid flight and rapid reproduction, developing the 2-winged body plan that distinguishes them from all other flying insects, refining the sucking mouthparts that will eventually allow their descendants to feed on everything from nectar to blood to rotting organic matter. The flies visible now, in the patches of moonlight above the wetter zones of the clearing, are moving in the characteristically erratic way of dipteran's rapid, slightly chaotic flight paths that are actually extremely precise tracking maneuvers, following odor plumes, and following other flies, and following the complex spatial geometry of the night air, with a precision that is difficult to appreciate from the outside. A fly's compound eye does not see the world as you see it. It sees a faster world. The compound eye of a fly can resolve flicker at a rate several times faster than the human eye, which is why flies are so difficult to swat. The world comes to a fly as a higher frequency film than it comes to any mammal. The night, to a fly's eye, is full of visual events too fast for our perception. Here is something that most people find unexpectedly beautiful about the amber record. Some of the amber deposits contain evidence of behavior, not just bodies. A spider caught in the act of wrapping prey in silk, an insect in the process of emerging from its pupal case, 2 insects in mating position, a parasitic mite clinging to the exoskeleton of a beetle host. These are behaviors that lasted seconds or minutes in the life of the original animals, behaviors that are present in every natural system from the Jurassic to today, behaviors that would have been invisible to any observer who was not watching at exactly that moment, in exactly that place. The amber was that observer. It preserved the moment, froze it, carried it across 150 million years of subsequent time to arrive in the hands of people who could look through microscopes and see what was happening on that long-ago morning or evening when the resin fell. The study of amber is called resinology, or, more specifically, the study of amber inclusions is called paleoentomology, when insects are involved, paleobotany, when plant material is studied, and various other specialized names for various types of preserved material. But all of these names point toward the same thing. The amber is a library, not a library of books, but a library of moments, random, unselected, preserved by the blind chance of a drop of resin falling at the right time in the right place, that together compose a kind of portrait of the living forest at the molecular and cellular scale. The beetle on your hand has made its way to your wrist and is now investigating the slightly warmer zone of skin near the pulse point with what seems like increased interest, the antennae working rapidly. What it is detecting, almost certainly, is the scent signature of your body, the specific combination of compounds that living mammals produce through their skin and breath. Compounds that in this Jurassic context are genuinely novel, genuinely unprecedented, nothing this beetle or any beetle has encountered in all the generations of beetles that preceded it. You are, to this small animal, a completely unprecedented olfactory experience. It decides you are not food and takes flight from your wrist in a quick, efficient departure that involves unfolding the flying wings from beneath the elytra and launching itself into the air with a brief buzz of those wings before they fold again, and the beetle becomes a small dark shape crossing the moonlight. Toward the fern bank, you watch it go. The amber that might have caught it does not catch it tonight. It escapes into the continuing life of the Jurassic, small and purposeful and entirely absorbed in being exactly what it is. There is something in the amber record that bears on sleep in an unexpected way. Researchers have found that some amber inclusions contain structures consistent with the parasites of early mammals' mites and other ectoparasites found in association with mammal hair preserved in the amber matrix. This means that the early mammals of the Jurassic were being studied, in a sense, by their parasites, who knew the architecture of mammal fur and mammal skin in extraordinary detail. The parasites understood the mammal body from the outside in. They navigated the forest of hair, found the warm skin beneath, negotiated the chemical landscape of a mammal's exterior. And here is the thing about parasites. They are extraordinarily conservative, evolutionarily. Some parasite lineages show almost no change over tens of millions of years, because the host body they inhabit, the mammal body, has changed so little in its fundamental organization. The mite that clung to the fur of a Morganucodon in this Jurassic forest used techniques that its modern descendants still use to navigate the same basic architecture of mammal fur. The host has changed. The parasite has barely needed to. The insects of the night will continue their business for the remaining hours of darkness. They do not pause for observation. They do not notice the story being told about them. They simply are numerous, busy, diverse, extraordinarily competent at the specific things they have evolved to be competent at, and the night holds them in its warm, moonlit, resin-scented hands, and does what the Jurassic night always does with the life it contains. It carries it forward. Let the amber memory of this night settle into you, not as information to retain, not as facts to carry back into the morning. Those are already accumulated, already there, already preserved in whatever amber your attention has created from this evening. Just the feeling of it, the beetle on the wrist, the fly above the fern, the resin on the conifer trunk, warm and slightly sticky, running very slowly down the bark toward the ground where it will pool and harden and eventually forget everything except the shape of what it held. The ground beneath the ferns and the composted leaf litter is stone. Not far below, perhaps 2 or 3 meters in this particular location, perhaps less elsewhere in the clearing where the soil layer is thinner, is the bedrock of the Jurassic world, the geological substrate on which everything above it rests. You cannot see it. And in ordinary experience, you would not think about it, because the biological world claims so much of available attention that the geological world becomes background. But tonight, in this ancient place, it is worth going down to that stone in your imagination, resting your attention on the deep material of the earth itself. The rock here is a late Triassic to early Jurassic sedimentary formation laid down in cycles of river deposition and occasional flooding that happened before the forest above you existed, before the particular ecosystem you are sitting in had assembled itself. The rock records, in its layers, the landscape that preceded this one. River channels now compressed to thin bands of coarser, grained stone. Floodplain deposits now rendered into smooth mudstone. Occasional intervals of volcanic ash that drifted in from distant eruptions and settled on the ancient landscape like snow, then were buried and turned to thin pale markers in the rock's autobiography. The Earth in the Jurassic was in a particular phase of its own long biography. The supercontinent Pangaea, which had held all of the world's landmass together since the Permian, was in the process of breaking apart. Not quickly, nothing geological happens quickly, but inexorably, driven by the movement of the convection cells in the Earth's mantle, by the buildup of heat beneath a single enormous landmass that eventually found release in the rifting of that landmass into pieces. By the late Jurassic, the separation between what would become North America and what would become Europe and Africa was already underway. A narrow sea, the Proto-Atlantic, was opening between them, still far narrower than the ocean it would eventually become, but already present, already creating a marine pathway where once there had been continuous land. The exact configuration of the landmasses in the Jurassic is one of those things that requires sustained imaginative effort to really see. The map of the Jurassic world is a map that no human cartographer has ever drawn from direct observation. A map reconstructed from the orientation of magnetic minerals in ancient rocks, from the distribution of fossil species that could only have coexisted on the same landmass, from the geometry of ocean floor spreading recorded in the basalt of the deep sea floor. It is a map assembled from clues, not from survey, and it has been revised multiple times as new clues emerge. What we know with reasonable confidence. By the late Jurassic, the northern supercontinent Laurasia, roughly North America plus Europe plus Asia, and the southern supercontinent Gondwana, roughly South America plus Africa plus Antarctica plus Australia plus India, had been largely separated for millions of years, though they were still connected by various land bridges at different periods. The Tethys Sea, a great warm shallow sea that extended from what is now the Mediterranean eastward across the future Middle East, and into what is now the Himalayan region, created a major seaway between the northern, southern land masses, its warm, shallow waters teeming with the marine life of the Jurassic Ocean. The marine Jurassic world was as extraordinary as the terrestrial one, perhaps more so in terms of sheer novelty. The ichthyosaurs, fish-shaped marine reptiles that had evolved independently from terrestrial ancestors, had by the late Jurassic diversified into dozens of species, some resembling nothing that exists today. Giant forms reaching 12 meters in length, specialized fish-eaters with enormous binocular eyes adapted for deep diving, and the amazing Temnodontosaurus, which had an eye the size of a dinner plate, the largest known eye of any vertebrate animal which it used to hunt in the absolute darkness of deep water. The plesiosaurs were also present in the Jurassic seas, though they had not yet reached the diversity or the enormous sizes they would achieve in the Cretaceous. These were the long-necked, broad-bodied marine reptiles, whose distinctive four-flipper body plan evolved independently from that of the ichthyosaurs and represents a completely different solution to the problem of how a land-evolved tetrapod body might move effectively through water. Where ichthyosaurs swam by undulating their bodies and tails in a fish-like manner, plesiosaurs moved through water by flapping their flippers in a manner more analogous to the wing stroke of a sea turtle or a penguin underwater flight. In effect, propelled by 4 huge hydrofoil limbs rather than by body undulation. Here is a connection between the terrestrial world you are sitting in and the marine world far beyond the horizon. The calcium carbonate that forms the shells of the marine animals in those Jurassic seas will eventually be compressed, altered by heat and pressure over millions of years, and transformed into limestone. Much of the limestone that now exists on Earth, the limestone of the Alps, of the English countryside, of the Florida peninsula, contains within it the compressed and altered remains of Jurassic marine life. The rock beneath a modern limestone hillside is, at microscopic resolution, a graveyard of tiny shells, each one the former home of something that was alive in a Jurassic sea, that breathed and fed and reproduced in that ancient ocean, and that was incorporated, after its death, into the permanent record of the Earth's surface. The ground beneath you participates in cycles on a timescale that makes even the Jurassic look recent. The rocks that are being formed in this forest right now, the river sediments, the lake deposits, the organic-rich soils that will someday compress into coal will be buried by subsequent layers, then slowly transported by plate tectonics, potentially subducted beneath another plate, melted in the mantle, erupted as new volcanic rock, deposited again as new sediment. The material of the Earth is always in motion, always cycling through these enormous long-period transformations that take hundreds of millions of years to complete. You are sitting on a portion of the Earth's crust that has been through many such cycles already. The rock below you was sediment before it was rock, and the sediment came from the erosion of older rocks, which were themselves made from even older material, all the way back to the accretion of the Earth from the solar nebula 4.5 billion years ago. You are, in the deepest sense, sitting on a piece of the original raw material of the solar system, processed through billions of years of geological transformation, and currently configured as the substrate of a Jurassic jungle, but continuous in its material with everything that has ever been part of this planet. This is the weight of stone and time. Not oppressive, there is nothing oppressive in it once you stop fighting the scale of it, and simply accept it as the dimension within which everything real happens. The stone is patient in a way that makes even the patience of the Jurassic forest seem hasty. The stone does not have patience as an attribute. Patience implies the possibility of impatience. The stone simply is, at whatever time scale it happens to be operating on, doing whatever it happens to be doing, utterly indifferent to the urgency or the anxieties of anything above it. There is a quality of resting on stone, really resting on it, allowing the weight of your body to fully meet the solidity of the earth beneath the soil, beneath the roots, beneath the forest floor, that is among the most grounding experiences available. The stone receives your weight without adjustment. It does not give, does not yield, does not accommodate. It is simply there, solid and ancient and entirely sufficient, and your weight is nothing to it, and the smallness of your weight against the solidity of what receives it is, paradoxically, a comfort. The Jurassic forest feels this too, in whatever way a forest feels things. The roots of the great conifers push into the rock, finding the cracks and fissures, widening them over centuries of patient growth, drawing mineral nutrients from the stone's surface chemistry, and incorporating them into the wood and needles of the trees above. The forest and the stone are in a relationship, the forest slowly transforming the stone into soil, the stone providing the mineral foundation on which the forest's biological chemistry rests. A relationship that has been operating in various forms since the first vascular plants colonized bare rock in the Silurian, 440 million years ago. Plate tectonics is, in a sense, a slow kind of weather. The same forces that drive the movement of weather systems through the atmosphere differential. Heating creating pressure. Gradients driving circulation drive the movement of the lithospheric plates. Through the mantle over much longer timescales, the Earth is never still. It only seems still at human timescales, the way a stone in a river seems still to an insect that lives for a day. Let the stone beneath you hold you. It has been holding things since long before this forest was here. It will be holding things long after this particular configuration of life has shifted into whatever it is becoming. Your weight, right now, is the most recent thing this ancient material has been asked to hold, and it holds it without effort, without strain, without any need for the weight to be anything other than exactly what it is. Rest into the stone. Let the weight of the day, the weight of the week, the weight of everything that has been weighing on you, find the stone at last and transfer to it. The stone can take it. The stone has been taking weights beyond all imagining for 4.5 billion years. What you are putting down is nothing to it, and everything to you. There is a particular depth of night, not early night, and not the approach of dawn, but the middle place, the hours of deepest dark, when the night has been going on long enough that even nocturnal animals have entered some lower activity phase, when the forest's biological rhythms have descended to their slowest register that has a quality of sound unlike any other part of the 24-hour cycle. This is that time now. The moon has passed its zenith and is descending toward the western horizon. The insects are still audible but at a lower intensity, as though even they have slightly reduced their broadcasting. The Jurassic jungle is in its deepest night, and the sounds of it are very particular. Sound is not simple in a forest. Forests modify sound in ways that acoustic ecologists study with considerable fascination. Attenuating high frequencies while allowing lower frequencies to travel further, creating complex interference patterns where sounds reflect off tree trunks and undergo diffraction around large obstacles, producing a sound environment with a characteristic texture quite different from the sound environment of open ground. The Jurassic forest has this characteristic, perhaps even more pronounced than modern forests because of the greater average diameter of the conifer trunks. Large diameter obstacles create more significant acoustic shadows and the dense, sound-absorbing quality of the multi-layered fern understory. What this means practically is that the sounds of the deep Jurassic night reach you as a series of acoustic layers. The sounds that originate very close to you, a fern frond settling, a drop of water falling from a leaf onto the soil, arrive with all their high-frequency content intact, sharp and detailed, and located with precision. Sounds from a moderate distance, the river, 20 meters away. The insect chorus in the fern bank, the movement of something in the mid-distance forest arrive with their high frequencies attenuated, slightly muffled, present but softer than they were at the source. And sounds from a great distance, a sauropod moving somewhere deep in the forest. Another storm building somewhere far to the east, arrive as predominantly low-frequency information, as bass presences rather than full-spectrum sounds, as things you feel in the chest before you identify them with the ear. The dinosaurs communicated in sound. This is almost certain, though the specifics of how they communicated and what they communicated remain subjects of active research and some disagreement. What we know from their descendant birds, and from the anatomy of their skulls and vocal tracts, is that the theropod lineage in particular was capable of producing sounds through a syrinx, the uniquely avian vocal organ, or a predecessor to the syrinx, which would have allowed a range of vocalizations more complex than anything a crocodilian produces. Some dinosaurs also had hollow cranial crests that may have functioned as resonating chambers, allowing them to produce particularly penetrating low-frequency calls. The low-frequency sounds were probably most important for long-distance communication through the forest. Low frequencies travel further and around obstacles better than high frequencies, which is why the lowest sounds in a forest environment, the deep calls of large birds, the low rumbles of large mammals, are the ones that carry over the greatest distances. A large dinosaur capable of producing infrasonic or near-infrasonic vocalizations could, in principle, communicate with other members of its species over distances of several kilometers through dense forest. Whether any Jurassic dinosaurs actually did this is unknown, but the anatomy does not exclude it. Right now, in the deepest part of the night, the sound environment has reduced to something close to a minimum. The individual sounds are small and clear and widely spaced, like stars in a clear sky, each one distinct, with genuine silence between them. A cricket relative stops and starts. A small animal moves through the leaf litter with brief, specific sounds of disturbance. Somewhere downstream, the river shifts slightly in its course over a particular stone, and the sound changes by a tiny, almost undetectable interval. These are the sounds between the sounds, the small facts that the silence allows to be heard. Human ears are not naturally suited to this quality of quiet. We evolved in social environments that were rarely this silent. There were always voices, movements, the sounds of others nearby. The deep quiet of a natural environment at its lowest activity hour is something that modern human beings rarely experience, and that many people find initially uncomfortable, their nervous systems scanning for the social context that should accompany waking awareness. But the discomfort, if it comes, passes, and what replaces it is something that modern life offers almost no equivalent for. The experience of a genuine sonic space, a space in which your own thoughts, if you let them settle, become almost audible. The stars make no sound. This seems obvious, but it is worth noting. The universe is full of energy, full of events, full of the most extreme physical processes imaginable, and in the near vacuum of space, none of it makes sound. Sound requires a medium molecules to compress and rarefy, to carry the pressure waves that arrive at an ear as vibration. Space has almost no medium. The enormous events of the universe, the supernovae, the collisions of neutron stars, the jets of matter screaming from active galactic nuclei at near the speed of light, all of this happens in the deepest silence imaginable. The sound you hear in a quiet forest is among the loudest things in the observable universe, simply because it has air to travel through. But we say the stars are silent in a different sense too, meaning that they do not communicate, do not address the creatures on the planets orbiting them, do not respond to observation or attention. The stars above this Jurassic jungle have been burning for billions of years without any awareness of the jungle below, without any relationship to the life that has been looking up at them. The relationship is entirely one-directional. Life looks up, uses the starlight for navigation and for calibrating internal clocks, responds to the star's presence in dozens of indirect biological ways, and the stars do not notice. And yet there is something in looking at this night sky, this particular Jurassic sky, without any human architecture below it, without any light pollution anywhere on the planet, without any electromagnetic noise from the technology that will eventually fill every frequency band of the electromagnetic spectrum that produces a specific quality of smallness that is not diminishment but relief. The relief of being genuinely, accurately sized. The relief of occupying exactly the right fraction of the universe, which is to say a very small fraction, which is to say a fraction so small that the word fraction doesn't quite apply. The insect chorus has dropped another register. The air is cooler now, the pre-dawn cooling that begins hours before dawn actually arrives, the Earth's surface reaching its minimum temperature in the last hours of darkness. The ferns are very still. The river is the same sound it has been all night, continuous and consistent, the one sound that doesn't vary with the night's progress. A single drop falls from the canopy above you, the last of the rain that fell hours ago, working its way down through the layered branches one level at a time, finally arriving at the ground, and the sound it makes when it hits the soil beside you is a single, small, complete sound, a punctuation mark in the longest sentence the night has been writing. Here is something about the deep night sounds of the Jurassic that is particular, and that science has only recently begun to explore. The acoustic environment of the Jurassic may have included sounds that no living human ear can hear. Not ultrasonic, though. Insects certainly produced ultrasonic frequencies then as now, but infrasonic. Sounds below the 20 Hz lower threshold of human hearing. Sounds that travel as pressure waves through the ground and the dense air, but register only as a kind of felt presence rather than a heard sound. Large sauropods, moving through forest, would have produced infrasonic components in their vocalizations and their footfalls. Some researchers have proposed that the Jurassic forest may have had a constant, below-threshold, acoustic environment of deep infrasound produced by the movement and possible vocalization of the enormous animals inhabiting it. If this is true, and it remains speculative, impossible to confirm or refute from the fossil record alone, then the deep Jurassic night was not only the richly textured sonic environment you can hear right now, but also a landscape of unfelt presences, of energy moving through the air and the ground, at frequencies too low for any mammal to hear, but perceptible in some cases, to the skin, to the bones, to the inner ear's sensitivity to vibration. The night had more to it than hearing could retrieve. It had a felt dimension, a physical texture of moving energy that the body experienced without the mind's mediation. You may be experiencing something like this now, even in your own quiet surroundings. The low-frequency sounds of any environment, the vibration of a building, the deep inaudible frequencies produced by wind, the near-infrasonic components of traffic or machinery at a distance are processed partly below the threshold of conscious awareness and contribute to the felt quality of a space without being identified as sound. Sleep researchers have documented that certain low-frequency environments promote sleep while others disturb it. and that these effects operate below the threshold at which the sleeper would identify any sound as the cause. The Jurassic night has, perhaps, the optimal low-frequency environment for sleep. The deep, slow frequencies of a living forest, the resonant bass frequencies of wind in large trees, the ground-transmitted vibrations of large animals moving at distance, the infrasound of the river's moving water these would compose, below the threshold of conscious perception, a soundscape of remarkable biological compatibility with the resting nervous system of any mammal. The small ancestors of everything we are were sleeping in this sound. Their bodies were calibrated to it. The frequency signature of the deep Jurassic forest night is, in some real neurobiological sense, the original sleep sound for the mammal lineage. You are hearing it now. Not hearing it exactly, your conscious ear cannot retrieve the infrasound component of what surrounds you here tonight. But some part of you is receiving it. Some part of you is in contact with the deep, low-frequency fact of this ancient living world, this forest that breathes at a pace below any pace your waking mind can follow. That contact is being made right now, in the felt weight of the ground beneath you, and the still air against your skin, and the barely perceptible vibration of the conifer trunk at your back. The sound between the stars. The sound between the sounds. The hum of the world going on at a frequency below, the one the mind keeps watch on. That sound is here. It has always been here. It was here before you arrived, and it will be here long after you are gone. And right now it is doing what it has always done in the presence of something small and warm and tired. It is saying, as gently as anything has ever said anything, that it is all right to close your eyes. In the approaching dawn, not visible yet, not even as a lightening in the eastern sky, but present as a smell change, a subtle increase in the coolness of the air, to a slight shift in the quality of the darkness. The plants of the Jurassic jungle are doing something that will continue to amaze biologists for as long as biologists exist to be amazed. They are conducting photosynthesis. Not yet, not in this last deep hour before the light, but they are readying for it. The chemical machinery of light capture and carbon fixation in each cell already cycling through its preparatory phases, the chloroplasts orientating themselves in anticipation of the first photons, the stomata, the microscopic breathing pores in each leaf surface, making their dawn calculation about when to open and how far and for how long before the day's heat makes evaporative water loss a significant risk. Plants know more than they are given credit for. This is not metaphor. The sensory and signaling capacities of plants, their ability to detect light direction and quality, to sense the approach of drought through soil-water potential, to respond to the touch of insects or wind with specific chemical changes, to communicate distress to neighboring plants through airborne chemical signals. These are real, documented, biologically sophisticated capacities that operate through mechanisms quite different from animal nervous systems, but that accomplish many of the same regulatory functions. The plants of this Jurassic forest are not passive. They are extraordinarily active, each one continuously processing information about its environment and adjusting its physiology in response. Before the first flower, this is the world you are in tonight. The first true flowering plant, the first angiosperm, with its enclosed ovary and its pollinator-attracting bloom, will not evolve for approximately 40 to 50 million years from this moment. 40 to 50 million years. The Jurassic itself is only 56 million years long. You would have to live through an entire Jurassic period to reach the world of flowers from where you are now sitting. The flower, that structure so fundamental to modern landscape aesthetics, to human culture, to the emotional register of beauty and gift and occasion, does not yet exist anywhere on Earth. What existed instead was not a lesser thing, simply a different thing, one that had its own forms of beauty and its own ecological logic. The cone-bearing plants, the gymnosperms, a word meaning naked seeds, had been the dominant land plants for over 100 million years by the Jurassic. Their reproductive strategy, which involves releasing pollen to the wind and trusting that some portion of it will encounter a receptive cone and fertilize the egg within, is less efficient in theory than the targeted pollinator strategy that flowers will eventually develop. But in a world without flowering plants, there are no pollinators, and without pollinators, there is no selective pressure toward the development of flowers. The gymnosperm strategy was not a compromise. It was the only strategy available, and it worked spectacularly for hundreds of millions of years. The cycads in this clearing were probably pollinated by insects even in the Jurassic, which is a fact that surprises many people who assume animal pollination to be exclusively an angiosperm phenomenon. Some cycad species produced heat and scent from their cones in ways consistent with attracting specific beetle species, and some beetle fossils from Jurassic deposits show structures consistent with pollen transport on their bodies. The relationship between cycads and beetles may be, in fact, one of the oldest insect pollination relationships on Earth, predating the bee and flower partnership by at least 100 million years, a quiet, unsung collaboration between very old lineages that has been almost entirely overlooked in the story of pollination because it involves no flowers and produces no honey and generates no human poetry. The ginkgos were wind-pollinated, as they still are today. On spring mornings, and there were spring mornings in the Jurassic, the seasons turning as they always have, though the seasons were wetter and warmer than modern seasons, the male ginkgo trees released their pollen in quantities visible to the naked eye, a haze of pale gold spreading from the trees and drifting on the prevailing winds. Some of this pollen landed on the receptive structures of female ginkgo trees, completing the fertilization that produced the ginkgo seeds, those fleshy, evil-smelling seeds that modern city planners avoid by planting only male ginkgo cultivars in urban settings. The smell of ginkgo seeds, which is remarkable in the specificity of its unpleasantness, is a trait that probably helped disperse the seeds in the Jurassic by attracting certain animals that could stomach the smell and carry the seeds before depositing them elsewhere. The ferns reproduced by spores rather than seeds, a more ancient strategy than either, one that dates back to the first land plants of the Silurian. Fern spores are among the smallest reproductive structures in the plant kingdom, tiny enough to be carried in atmospheric currents for hundreds of kilometers, light enough to remain suspended in air for hours or days. On nights like this one, following rain, the ferns release spores in quantities that would be visible as a faint dust if you had the right angle of light. These spores drift through the forest air, some landing in the soil nearby, some traveling far before alighting in conditions that may or may not be suitable for germination. The fern strategy for reproduction is in some ways the most democratic in all of plant biology. It puts its reproductive investment into enormous numbers of tiny propagules rather than into fewer, better provisioned seeds, betting on quantity and dispersal over quality and provision. And yet the fern has been doing this for 360 million years. The strategy, for all its apparent wastefulness, works. The fern does not need to optimize. It needs to persist. And persist it does, through every mass extinction and every climate catastrophe and every invasion of more competitive plant forms that has occurred since the Silurian, continuing to uncurl its croziers and release its spores and fill the available ground with its green, patient life. The fern is, among living plants, perhaps the most eloquent argument for the sufficiency of doing one thing very well for a very long time. In the approaching light, still not light, but the idea of approaching light, a concept the plants are already responding to the forest, begins a subtle preparation for the day. Chemical signals that were suppressed during the dark hours begin to cycle upward. Photoreceptor proteins in the cells of leaves begin to shift their configurations, anticipating the wavelengths of sunlight that will arrive in an hour or two. The hormones that govern plant activity, auxins, gibberellins, cytokinins, begin their morning adjustments, signaling growth to resume, signaling water transport to increase, signaling the opening of stomata in the leaves for the carbon dioxide exchange that drives photosynthesis. The trees are waking up, in the way that trees wake up. Very slowly, biochemically, without drama, without announcement. The same thing is happening in your own body right now. If you are still here and still attending the pre-dawn hormonal shift, the slight rise in body temperature, the adjustment of the circadian clock that has been tracking the night's progress. Cortisol, the waking hormone, has begun its slow morning ramp. The adenosine that accumulated through the night, the chemical signal of sleep need, has been gradually cleared as the sleep, if sleep has come, did its restorative work. Here is the question the Jurassic world poses, in its gentlest register. What would it have been like to be a plant here? Not to have a nervous system of the kind that could ask that question. Obviously, plants are not conscious in any sense that the word consciousness has been defined. But what would it be like to be in continuous, uninterrupted contact with the ground, rooted in it, drawing from it the mineral dissolved in water, exchanging gas with the air through a million tiny pores, growing continuously at the root tips and the branch ends at rates too slow for any animal to perceive. The plant is not passive. It is not absent. It is profoundly present in its environment, responding to it, participating in it, shaping it through the slow force of growth and the chemical language of signaling, just very, very slowly. The Wollemi pine is a tree discovered in 1,994 inches, a remote canyon in New South Wales, Australia. It is a living species of a genus, known previously only from Jurassic and Cretaceous fossils, a conifer whose needles and cones and growth pattern are almost identical to the fossil specimens found in rock that is 150 million years old. There are fewer than 100 wild Wollemi pines in existence. They grow in a single secret location that the Australian government does not publicly disclose in order to protect them. In botanical gardens around the world, cultivated specimens grow with a certain uncanny familiarity, not familiar from experience, because no human being has ever seen a wild Wollemi pine from any period before 1994, but familiar in the way that something very old is sometimes familiar. Recognized in a register below memory, below language, below the part of the mind that processes recognition as thought. If you have ever stood near a Wollemi pine, you have stood near a relative of the trees above you now. Their cones have the same architecture. Their needles are arranged in the same pattern. Their bark has the same textured quality. The biochemistry of their resin is recognizably related. They are, in the deepest sense of that word, kin not yours directly, but kin to what surrounds you, representatives of a lineage that has been doing this for 150 million years with no particular need to change. This is the world before the first flower. It is not a poorer world for the absence. It is a world that has found its own forms of beauty and its own forms of plenty, its own relationships between plant and animal and mineral and water and light, its own rhythms of growth and death and regrowth, its own patient success that requires no new strategy. Because the old one, the very old one, the oldest available one, is still working. In the pre-dawn quiet of the Jurassic jungle, surrounded by plants that have not yet been supplemented by the brilliant novelty of the flower, there is something very like completeness. Not incompleteness waiting to be resolved, but completeness, a wholeness, a sufficiency in what exists right now, in this hour, in this clearing, in this particular configuration of fern and cycad and conifer and moonlight, and the cooling air and the beginning of the day's first breath. The night is at its deepest now. Not the early dark, which has the energy of the day's recently departed warmth, and not the late dark, which carries the faint anticipation of what is about to arrive, but the middle place, the deepest fathom of the night's ocean, where the last light has been fully absorbed and the first light has not yet begun to form itself at the horizon's edge. This is the hour that belongs entirely to the dark, and the dark has accepted its own dominion with the quiet confidence of something that does not need to announce itself. The clearing is very still. The rain-washed air has settled into a transparency that makes the moonlight, the moon now below the tree line on the western side, its light arriving at an angle that barely clears the canopy fall at a long, golden angle across the ferns, touching them softly rather than illuminating them, laying a warmth of colour on what was silver an hour ago. The cycads at the centre of the clearing are dark bulk against a slightly lighter sky, their fronds tracing their radial pattern against the stars. Here is something about this hour of the Jurassic night that science has discovered, and that most people never learn. The smallest mammals of this period were probably not fully asleep, not in the way you might imagine, not curled in burrows in suspended unconsciousness. The early mammal sleep pattern, reconstructed from studies of the brain structures of their modern relatives, and of the fossil anatomy of their inner ear, was likely polyphasic, divided into multiple shorter sleep bouts across the 24-hour period, rather than consolidated into one long overnight sleep. A Morganucodon would sleep in intervals, waking to forage when conditions permitted, sleeping again when activity was unsafe or energy was low. The consolidated, long-form nighttime sleep that most modern humans practice may be a relatively recent innovation in mammalian biology, associated with the development of cognitive demands that require extended REM sleep for memory consolidation. This is worth sitting with. the sleep architecture that governs your own nights, the specific phasing of slow-wave sleep and REM sleep, the way your body cycles through these stages approximately 4 to 5 times per night, the way memory is processed and consolidated during sleep in ways that cannot happen during waking. All of this represents a set of biological needs that have been refined over the entire history of the mammal lineage, from these small polyphasic Jurassic sleepers through millions of generations of increasing brain complexity and social sophistication and cognitive demand to the particular nervous system you inhabit tonight. Your sleep is an evolutionary product as surely as your hands or your language. It was shaped by what was needed. It became what it is because each stage of its development served the life that needed it. What does the Jurassic jungle need from this deepest hour of the night? Not much, in the active sense. This is a rest period for the whole system, not sleep exactly. Because ecosystems don't sleep. But a low-energy phase, a metabolic trough, an hour in which the rates of biological activity across the board are at their minimum and the system is running on maintenance rather than growth. The fungi in the soil continue their slow chemical work. The bacteria continue their even slower chemical work. The trees continue the internal redistribution of sugars and water that never stops entirely. The aquatic organisms in the river continue the continuous processing of nutrients. But the big, visible, energy-intensive activity, the predators hunting, the large herbivores feeding, the insects flying in dense clouds above the water, all of this has reduced to its lowest level. The deepest dark is, in ecological terms, a kind of collective breath-holding, a pause between the activities of the night and the preparations for day. It lasts perhaps 2 hours, from roughly 2 in the morning by whatever timekeeping we might impose on the Jurassic, though of course no such system exists here, to perhaps 4, when the first subtle signs of pre-dawn activity begin to appear in the behavior of certain birds-to-be and early mammals. Within those 2 hours, the forest holds its breath, and everything in it holds its breath with it. And the silence is not the silence of absence, but the silence of presence resting. You have been in this forest for a long time now. Your eyes, adapted to the moonlight and the occasional phosphorescent glow of the fungi at the clearing edge, have developed a nocturnal sensitivity that makes the darkness less opaque than it was when you first arrived. You can see, in the ambient light of the stars and the declining moon, the individual fronds of the ferns, the ridged bark of the conifer behind you, the smooth stones at the clearing edge where the drainage runs. You can see the sky, which is very clear now after the rain, very dense with stars, the Milky Way a structure rather than a smear, its internal architecture of dust lanes and stellar concentrations visible in a way that requires genuine darkness and genuine time to see. Something moves at the far edge of the clearing. You see it as a darkness, against a slightly lighter darkness. A shape that is not plant shape, not the static geometry of frond or trunk, but the fluid silhouette of an animal moving slowly through the fern bank. It is small, perhaps the size of a large cat, perhaps smaller. It moves with the deliberate pace of something that is not hunting urgently, but is nonetheless attending to the world around it with full biological concentration. It pauses. Its head turns toward the center of the clearing, and for a moment you have the sense, the impression, the not quite perception of being looked at. Then it continues its slow progress through the ferns, and is gone into the dark between the trees. You will never know what it was. This is the Jurassic, and the small animals of the Jurassic are not catalogued for you. No field guide exists for this forest. No name has been assigned to whatever that was. It was a member of whatever population occupies this particular forest margin in this particular period, going about its particular business in the night, and it passed through your experience and left the impression of its movement and perhaps the brief reciprocity of its attention. And that is everything that can be known about it. This not knowing is part of what makes the deep Jurassic night so profound as a place to spend this hour. The modern world is extraordinarily thoroughly named. Every species that science has encountered has a Linnean designation, a formal description, a place in the taxonomic tree, a literature. The modern world is named all the way down to the bacterial level, and the naming process continues at a rate of thousands of new species per year. The Jurassic world is different. Most of what lived in it will never be known. The fraction of Jurassic organisms that fossilized is tiny. The fraction of those that has been found is tiny. The fraction of those that has been formally described is tiny. Most of the life of the Jurassic passed through its days and nights without leaving any record accessible to science. This means that most of the life around you right now is, and will remain, anonymous. The fungi consuming the dead wood at the base of the old conifer, unknown species, never to be formally described. The mites in the fern litter, unknown genera, unknown ecological relationships, unknown biochemistry. The small plants in the shaded understory that you have been seeing without naming all night, most of them undescribed. Many from lineages that will leave no fossils accessible enough to be studied. The night is full of life that will never be known, and it gets along perfectly well without being known. It is not diminished by anonymity. It is not made less real by the absence of a scientific name. It simply is, as fully and completely as anything that has been described and named and published in journals and taught in classrooms. The anonymity of most life is, in its way, very calming. The named world is an obligation. Species have names because scientists have invested in them, because there are papers to read and lectures to give and curricula to meet. The unnamed world carries no such obligation. It simply exists in its own biological completeness, requiring nothing from you and offering itself freely to whatever attention you bring to it. You don't need to know what that was at the clearing edge to have been, briefly, in its presence. The presence was real. The attention it gave you, if it gave you any, was real. The encounter happened, named or not. The deepest dark of the Jurassic night settles more completely around you as the moon finally disappears behind the western canopy, and the starlight alone lights the clearing. The ferns are silver-grey now, their shadows almost invisible in the even light. The cycads are silhouettes. The conifer above you is a black mass against the stars. Its resin smells stronger in the cooling air, a sharp and ancient smell that has been the smell of forests for over 300 million years. Your breathing has slowed. You may have noticed this, or you may not. It is the kind of thing that happens best when unnoticed. The body settling into its own rhythms when the mind is not supervising. The breath that was the breath of a waking mind, conscious of its own intervals, has become the breath of something more fundamental, something closer to the biological baseline, something like the breath of an animal resting in a safe place in a familiar dark. This is the breath the Jurassic knows. This is the breath that the small mammals of this forest breathe in their brief sleep bouts between foraging episodes. This is the breath that the great sauropods breathe in their standing rest, their enormous lungs cycling air through a respiratory system more efficient than anything that will follow them until the birds evolve. This is the breath of life itself in its most economical mode, conserving energy, restoring tissue, making of the night the restorative interval that every form of complex life requires. The jungle breathes. You breathe. The distinction between the two is thinner than it has been all night. The boundary between observer and observed, softened by the deep dark and the low-frequency hum and the smell of ancient resin and the sound of the river that has been going on all night without any need for it to stop or to change or to be anything other than what it is. Let the deepening dark take you. It is not going anywhere that you have not been before. It is the same dark that has always been at the bottom of any night. The same deep place that your body has always found when it finally let go of the day's commitments. The Jurassic dark is the same dark. It was always the same dark. Everything that lives on Earth has been going there since before the first mammal opened its eyes in a Jurassic dawn. You know the way. You have always known the way. The way is down, and quiet, and warm, and without urgency, and the jungle goes with you, and the moon that has set, and the stars that continue, and the river that continues, and the very old trees that continue. All of it continues. All of it is there, steady and present and patient, all the way down into the deepest place the night knows. From somewhere to the north, beyond the second ridge of trees that separates this clearing from the wider river valley, there is a sound that has been building gradually for the last half hour. You might have noticed it without noting it, filed it as background, as part of the undifferentiated sound of the jungle at night. But attended to directly, it resolves into something more specific. The combined sound of many large animals existing in close proximity, not a single pair of footfalls and a single deep exhalation, but a chorus of them, Many animals, moving together, or resting together, or doing whatever it is that large herbivores do at this hour in this forest. The herd, sauropods, were social animals. This is one of those conclusions that has hardened from hypothesis to well-supported inference over the last few decades of paleontological research, as the quality and quantity of sauropod trackways and nesting sites available for study has expanded dramatically. Track sites, locations where the footprints of multiple animals have been preserved in fine-grained sediment that later hardened to rock, often show parallel trackways. Not animals moving individually and crossing paths, but animals moving in the same direction at the same time, their footprints arranged in the way that a herd's footprints would be arranged. Multiple individuals side by side or in loose column, the larger prints of adults interspersed with the smaller prints of younger animals. The social organization of sauropod herds would have been different from the social organization of modern, large mammal herds, but it would have had its own logic, its own hierarchy, its own spatial rules. The largest, oldest adults, sometimes called the silverbacks of the sauropod world, though no silverback stripe exists for a sauropod, likely occupied the center of the group when the group was at rest or under threat, with younger and smaller animals on the periphery. This is the standard defensive arrangement of large terrestrial herbivores. Most vulnerable individuals closest to the group center, most capable individuals at the edges. Sauropod eggs and nesting sites tell part of the social story. Known sauropod nesting sites, and there are several, particularly from Argentina, where some of the best Cretaceous sauropod nesting evidence has been found, with Jurassic equivalents, presumed, though less completely documented, show evidence of communal nesting. Multiple females depositing eggs in the same general area, year after year, creating a nesting colony whose repeated use is demonstrated by the layering of eggshell fragments in the sediment. This communal nesting behavior implies some degree of social cohesion between breeding females. They returned to the same places, tolerated each other's proximity, possibly even engaged in some low-level cooperation in the defense of the nesting area. But the herd tonight is not nesting. It is doing what large herbivore herds do through the night when they are not feeding. Resting and moving and resting again, covering the ground in the slow, irregular pattern of animals that need to continue processing the day's enormous intake of plant material, while also maintaining the collective vigilance that makes the herd as a whole safer than any individual member would be. Alone, a herd of diplodocids at rest in the night would not all be lying down. Sauropods probably did not often lie down, given the physiological challenges of a heart pumping blood to a head 5 meters above the ground when the animal is prostrate. They would have rested standing, weight shifted to one side or distributed evenly, necks lowered to a comfortable resting position, eyes tracking the ambient visual information of the dark forest. The collective eyes of a resting sauropod herd at night covered a sphere of vision that no individual animal could manage. Positioned in a loose cluster in a wide section of the river valley, where the trees thinned and lines of sight were long, the herd members' individual visual fields overlapped and extended in all directions. A predator approaching from any direction would be detected by at least one animal before it could get close enough for a rush to be feasible, and the communication of the alarm when it came would be fast. A sauropod's startled response, the sudden lifting of the head and shifting of the body toward attention, was visible to every other member of the group, and would propagate through the herd in seconds. What sounds did they make? This question hangs over the entire study of dinosaur behavior with a particular frustration, because sound is among the least recoverable of fossil information. We have the bony anatomy of the skull and neck and thorax. We can infer from this the general structure of the respiratory tract, and make some estimates about the kinds of vocalizations a given anatomy could produce. For sauropods, with their enormous tracheas and vast chest cavities, the most likely vocalizations would have been low-frequency deep booms or rumbles produced by resonance in the large body cavities, perhaps accompanied by infrasonic components below the range of any other animal's hearing. Some researchers have proposed that sauropod herds may have maintained acoustic contact through infrasound, in the same way that modern elephants do, using very low-frequency calls that travel many kilometers through dense forest without significant attenuation. Elephants, the modern animals most often compared to sauropods in terms of their ecological role as mega-herbivores, are worth considering here. Not because elephants are evolutionary relatives of sauropods in any sense, but because they represent what convergent evolution produces when it is given the constraint of very large body size combined with the social and behavioral requirements of herd living. Elephants have complex social structures, long-term individual memories, grief responses to dead group members, sophisticated communication systems including both sonic and infrasonic vocalizations, coordinated group movement and defense, and what behavioral ecologists cautiously call individual personality differences. Whether any of these characteristics have analogues in sauropod behavior, we genuinely cannot say. But the evolutionary pressures on a very large, socially living herbivore are the same whether the animal in question has a trunk and four-toed feet or a 15-meter neck and a whiptail. Similar pressures tend to produce similar solutions. The sound from the river valley has shifted slightly. The animals have moved not dramatically, not in a startled response to anything, but in the gradual, continuous, low-urgency way that grazing animals shift position through the night. The particular quality of the sound has changed from something that conveyed many animals in stationary proximity to something that conveys many animals in slow, distributed movement, like the sound of a very large audience that has collectively decided to shift in its seats. The combined footfalls overlap and interfere with each other acoustically in a way that is not distinguishable as individual footsteps, but as a general acoustic texture of large animal movement. Somewhere in that moving texture, a younger animal you can tell from the higher pitch of the sound, the shorter interval between footfalls that implies shorter legs is moving faster than the adults around it, angling slightly away from the group's direction, following something that has caught its attention. A younger sauropod's curiosity about novel things was probably not so different from the curiosity of any young vertebrate, a tendency to investigate, to test the limits of parental tolerance, to experiment with the boundaries of what the group considers safe territory. In the dark valley below the ridge, a young diplodocid is making its brief autonomous investigation of something at the river's edge, and then it is turning back, and the texture of the herd sound readjusts to include it again. The herd provides something beyond protection. It provides company. This is easy to dismiss as anthropomorphic projection, the attribution of a social need that belongs to humans, to animals whose nervous systems may not generate the emotional architecture of loneliness or belonging. But the behavioral evidence for social bonding in large herbivore herds is strong enough that most behavioral ecologists take it seriously. Animals raised in isolation show stress responses. Animals separated from herd members they have associated with for long periods show behavioral changes consistent with distress. Whether these changes reflect something we should call emotional experience is a philosophical question that biology alone cannot answer. But the functional reality that group cohesion has biological consequences beyond simple predator defense seems well established. The oldest members of the herd carry within their bodies a knowledge of this landscape that no younger animal possesses. They know the seasonal patterns of the river, the places where water can be found in the driest periods, the locations of the richest feeding grounds, and the most sheltered resting sites. This knowledge is behavioral, stored in the neural patterns of learned roots and learned responses, and it is transmitted across generations not through genes but through the act of following. Young animals follow older animals, learn the routes they travel, learn the places they stop, learn the responses they produce to particular environmental conditions. This is the beginning of what will eventually, in some lineages, become culture, the non-genetic transmission of behavioral information across generations. The sauropod herd is, in this sense, a repository of environmental knowledge. The oldest female, if she exists in this group, if she is one of the animals whose combined breathing and movement contributes to that distant sound, carries within her memory a map of this river valley and the surrounding forests that stretches back decades. She has survived droughts and floods, the seasonal migrations of prey populations, the territorial shifts of resident predator groups. She has moved through this landscape in enough seasons and enough configurations that she knows its rhythms in a way that no single season's experience could provide. And everything the herd knows is available to every member of the herd, simply by following the oldest and most experienced members along the routes they have learned to walk. The sounds from the valley have settled into a lower register. The movement has reduced. The herd is entering its own version of the deep night rest. The animals clustered more closely, the pace of movement reduced to the minimum necessary for thermoregulation and digestion. The combined respiration of a dozen or more large animals produces a warmth that raises the ambient temperature of the air within the group by a measurable amount, an accidental communal warmth, a side effect of metabolic heat that nonetheless provides a genuine comfort, particularly for the youngest members clustered at the group's center. Far off, barely audible, something that might be a low vocalization. Not quite a sound, more like the felt pressure of a sound at the very bottom of the range human hearing can reach. One of the adults communicating something to the rest. All is well. The night is proceeding. The collective assessment of the darkness finds nothing urgent in it, and the herd hears it or feels it, and its already calm behavior becomes fractionally calmer, the collective body of the group settling a few degrees further toward rest. All is well. The night is proceeding. The collective assessment of this particular darkness finds nothing urgent in it. Let that assessment stand for you as well. You are, in this moment, held within a system so ancient and so comprehensive in its mechanisms of care, the stone below, the forest around, the river beside, the herd in the valley, the stars above, the moon going wherever the moon goes, that nothing requires your vigilance right now. The herd is keeping watch. The night is keeping watch. The very old, very patient, very steady systems of the world are in operation, and they do not need your help. Rest into what holds you. The herd knows you are here. The herd does not mind. Every detail of this night has been given to you by stone, not poetically literally. Everything you know about the Jurassic world, every fact that has been woven through this evening's journey, arrived on the path from a fossil, from a bone or a tooth or a footprint or a pollen grain, or a chemical signature preserved in ancient rock through geological processes that took millions of years to complete and human scientific effort to read. The Jurassic jungle is not a place you can visit by booking a flight. It is a place reconstructed, piece by careful piece, from the testimony of the things it left behind. The Morrison Formation is one of the most productive fossil sites in the world, stretching across what is now the American West through Wyoming, Utah, Colorado, Montana, New Mexico. It is a sequence of late Jurassic sedimentary rocks laid down between approximately 156 and 146 million years ago. The environment that produced these rocks was a vast floodplain, similar in some ways to the African Serengeti today, broad, flat, seasonal in its rainfall, crossed by rivers that flooded in the wet season and shrank to isolated waterholes in the dry. The animals that lived on this floodplain were among the largest that have ever existed. And when they died, some of them were buried in river sediments that, over millions of years, replaced their organic tissues with mineral replicas. The Morrison has given us Allosaurus and Brachiosaurus and Diplodocus and Stegosaurus. It has given us Camarasaurus, a shorter-necked sauropod, and Apatosaurus, once called Brontosaurus and then renamed in a taxonomic controversy, and now partially reinstated in a taxonomic clarification that made scientists and journalists happy in different ways. It has given us Gargoyleosaurus, a nodosaur, and Dryosaurus, a fleet ornithopod, and it has given us fragmentary remains of creatures that we still cannot fully identify, bones from lineages that apparently lived and died in the Morrison without leaving enough of themselves behind to reconstruct with confidence. Europe in the late Jurassic was different from North America. Where the Morrison was a vast interior floodplain, the European Jurassic landscape was an archipelago, a collection of islands and shallow seas that had formed as Pangaea's fragmentation created a region of shallow marine water between what would become the North Atlantic and the Tethys. These islands were colonized by dinosaurs and other animals. But isolated populations on islands tend to evolve differently from their mainland relatives, and the European Jurassic fauna shows many peculiarities attributable to island evolution, dwarf forms of species that achieved gigantic proportions elsewhere, unusual body proportions, distinctive ecological specializations. The Solnhofen limestone of Bavaria is perhaps the most famous Jurassic fossil site in Europe and one of the most famous fossil sites in the world. The Solnhofen sediments were laid down in a shallow, hypersaline lagoon in the late Jurassic, in conditions that were hostile enough to most organisms that decay was very slow, and the fine-grained limestone that formed from the lagoon sediment preserves fossils with extraordinary detail. The famous Archaeopteryx specimens, 11 known individuals, as of the most recent count, each one representing a slightly different view into the biology of this early bird or bird-like dinosaur, come from the Solnhofen. So do exquisitely preserved pterosaurs, fish, and various invertebrates, all captured in the fine limestone with a resolution that sometimes preserves feather impressions, soft tissue outlines, and the phosphatic remains of internal organs. Archaeopteryx confounds classification in a way that makes it one of the most philosophically interesting organisms in all of paleontology. It has fully formed feathers, the kind of veined, asymmetrical feathers found on the wing of a modern bird, capable of generating aerodynamic lift. But it also has teeth, clawed fingers on the wings, and a long, bony tail. Features of a non-avian dinosaur, features that modern birds have lost or modified. The first Archaeopteryx specimen was found in 1861, just 2 years after Darwin published On the Origin of Species, and it was immediately recognized as a transitional form, an animal that demonstrated, in its preserved anatomy, the gradual nature of the transition between the dinosaurian and avian body plans. The story of how Archaeopteryx was recognized, debated, claimed, and eventually scientifically assessed is one of the great stories in the history of science. The finest specimen, the Berlin Archaeopteryx, found in 1877, is kept in the Natural History Museum in Berlin, preserved in its limestone matrix with a completeness and clarity that makes photographs of it feel like portraits rather than scientific records. The feathers are preserved as dark impressions against the pale limestone. The hollow bones are there in their relative positions. The skull has been separated slightly from the neck, in a way that may reflect the action of the lagoon water after death. It is the most complete record of a pivotal evolutionary moment that we possess, the single most important document in the story of how the dinosaurs became the birds. China has in the last 3 decades transformed our understanding of feathered dinosaurs and early birds so profoundly that it represents one of the great revolutions in paleontological understanding of the modern era. The Yanliao biota and the Yixian Formation Jurassic and Cretaceous deposits, respectively, in northeastern China, have produced dozens of feathered theropod specimens, early bird species, and other organisms preserved with a quality comparable to or exceeding the Solnhofen. Anchiornis, mentioned earlier tonight, is a Chinese Jurassic discovery. So is Xiaotingia and Epidixipteryx, and dozens of other small feathered dinosaurs whose names are known mainly to specialists but whose existence has reshaped the entire narrative of avian origins. The melanosomes in fossil feathers, those tiny structures within individual feather cells that contain the pigment molecules responsible for color, were first identified and used for color reconstruction in 2010, a discovery so unexpected that it took several years for the scientific community to fully accept its implications. The shapes of melanosomes are characteristic for different colors. Spherical melanosomes produce gray or brown coloration. Elongated melanosomes produce black, and the arrangement of these differently shaped structures within the feather creates the patterns of color visible on the bird's surface. By examining the melanosomes in fossil feathers under electron microscopy, scientists have now reconstructed the color patterns of several Jurassic and Cretaceous feathered dinosaurs with reasonable confidence. Anchiornis was found to have been black and white with a rusty red crest. Microraptor, a later Cretaceous feathered dinosaur, was found to have had glossy black plumage similar to a modern raven, with an iridescent quality produced by the particular nanostructure of its feather barbules. These color reconstructions are not speculative. They are based on direct physical evidence, on the actual preservation of the structural elements that produce the color, and the color assignments are made with the same chemical logic that we use to determine the color of any material from its reflective properties. The dinosaurs were colorful. They were not the gray or green lizard-colored creatures of early imagination. They were at least in the lineages where we have evidence as varied and vivid in their coloration as modern birds. The footprints deserve their own recognition. Ichnology, the study of trace fossils, the preserved evidence of biological activity including footprints, burrows, feeding marks, and nesting traces, is a distinct branch of paleontology that recovers information no body fossil can provide. A footprint tells you about locomotion, about behavior, about the physical conditions at the moment it was made. A trackway, a sequence of footprints, tells you about speed, about gait, about posture, about social behavior if multiple animals are involved. And sometimes, a trackway preserves a moment of behavior, a turn, a pause, a change in pace that gives you a glimpse of a decision made by a living animal 150 million years ago. There is a trackway in the late Jurassic beds of Texas, the famous dinosaur trackways of Dinosaur Valley State Park, that preserves the parallel paths of a large sauropod and a large theropod moving along the same ancient river edge. The tracks are close together. The theropod's tracks show the animal moving at a measured pace behind and to the side of the sauropod. Whether this represents a hunt in progress, a hunt that was unsuccessful, or simply two animals using the same route without predatory intent, cannot be determined from the tracks alone. But the proximity is arresting two very large animals, one a potential predator and one potential prey, sharing the same stretch of bank, their individual weight and intention recorded in the mud. That was their shared moment. The chemical record of the Jurassic, the isotopic signatures in the rock, the molecular biomarkers in the sediment, the preserved gases in the amber bubbles, provides information that purely physical fossil evidence cannot. Oxygen isotope ratios in fossil tooth enamel record the temperature of the water the animal drank, which tells us about local climate. Carbon isotopes in fossil wood tell us about the CO2 concentration of the atmosphere the tree grew in. Sulfur isotopes in marine sediments tell us about ocean chemistry and the presence or absence of oxygen in the water column. Together, these chemical records compose a picture of the Jurassic environment at a resolution and specificity that physical fossils alone could never achieve. The scientists who read these records are doing something remarkable. They are reconstructing a world from its residue. Not from memory. No memory exists of the Jurassic. Not from observation, no observer was present, but from the material evidence that the world left behind, processed through techniques ranging from microscopy to mass spectrometry to X-ray tomography, interpreted through the framework of known physical and chemical laws that govern how materials behave over millions of years of geological processing. The result is imperfect, always provisional, always subject to revision as new evidence accumulates. But it is real. It is the best available picture of what the world looked like when you were there tonight. You are in a world reconstructed from its own memory. The Jurassic remembers itself through stone and chemistry, and the accidental immortality of things preserved in the right place at the right time. Tonight, you have walked through a version of that memory, and something of the night you walked through has settled into you not as information exactly, but as a felt sense of the depth and scale and extraordinary biological richness of the planet you have always been living on. The Jurassic is not elsewhere. It is beneath you, in the stone that everything rests on. It is the deep past of the same world you wake up in. The fossils remember. The amber remembers. The layered stone remembers. And now, perhaps, some small part of you remembers too, not the specific facts, though those are there as well, but the quality of the night, the warmth of the resin smell, the sound of the river, the silhouette of a pterosaur against the Milky Way, the patient presence of the herd in the valley below the ridge. These are things the Jurassic gave you tonight, freely, without conditions, as it gives itself to anyone who is willing to be still enough, and quiet enough, and patient enough to receive it. The fossils that will be made from this night's life are forming right now. In the silt of the river bend, in the resin flows on the conifer bark, in the fine-grained lake deposits of the valley floor. 150 million years from now, give or take the margin of error inherent in such estimates, some of them will be found. Some will be studied. Some will contribute to a picture of this night that a future scientist working in a future discipline with future instruments will assemble into something approaching the truth of what was here. Let that scientist find you well represented in the record. Let the night you have had here be one worth remembering, in stone or in whatever other forms memory takes. Something has changed. You feel it before you could name it, a quality in the air that is different from how the air has been all night. A subtle directional shift, a beginning of something that has not yet arrived, but whose approach can be sensed by whatever part of you has been tracking the night's progress without your conscious instruction. The darkness is still complete around you. The stars are still present, still arranged in their ancient positions. The river is still doing what the river does. And yet, something at the very edge of this world is beginning to consider a different possibility. The transition from night to day in the Jurassic happens through gradations so subtle that the first of them is perceptible only if you have been very still and very quiet for a very long time, which you have been, and so you catch the first of them. A change in the smell of the air, not a dramatic change, not the sudden warm rush of sunlight on heated ground that comes later, not the resinous amplification that the first direct light produces on conifer bark, but a shift in the balance of smells. The cool mineral smell of the deepest nightstone and dew, and the metallic quality of the river in darkness beginning to be joined by something earlier, warmer, something that comes from the beginning of temperature change in the eastern air, as the lower atmosphere starts its slow response to the approaching sun. The birds, if we can call them that, the early bird dinosaurs, the avialans and bird-like maniraptors that roost in the upper canopy, will be the first audible sign of the transition, not yet. But soon, even in the Jurassic, the pre-dawn period carried the potential for something that would eventually, in the lineages that lead to modern birds, become one of the most extraordinary acoustic events in nature, the dawn chorus. In the Jurassic, the dawn chorus was simpler, fewer species, less acoustic complexity, the product of simpler vocal anatomy, but the behavior itself, the tendency of birds and bird-like animals to vocalize at dawn, is ancient enough that it probably already existed in some form in the animals roosting above you tonight. Why do birds sing at dawn? The question has occupied ornithologists for decades, and the answers are multiple and not mutually exclusive. Dawn song establishes territory for the day ahead. A bird that sings loudly and clearly at first light is communicating its presence and fitness to potential rivals before the activity of the day makes such communication harder to isolate against a noisy background. Dawn song also functions in mate attraction. Females of many species assess the quality of potential mates partly through the quality and duration of their dawn singing, and the low-light conditions of dawn are perhaps the hour when a male's song is least accompanied by visual competition, making the acoustic signal relatively pure. And dawn song simply may have a physiological trigger that has little to do with social function directly. The particular spectral quality of pre-dawn light activates hormonal cascades in bird brains that produce the urge to vocalize, and this activation has been conserved over millions of years because it consistently correlates with productive social moments. In the Jurassic, the avialans roosting above are small and probably not as vocally sophisticated as any modern songbird. Their calls would be more analogous to the contact calls of modern raptors or the simple territorial vocalizations of gallinaceous birds than to the complex songs of passerines. But they are real vocalizations produced by an early syrinx or proto-syrinx, and they will be among the first sounds that the new day makes. They have not started yet. The darkness holds, and the birds hold with it, waiting in the completely unconscious, reflexively biological way that creatures wait when their neurochemistry has not yet received the signal to proceed. The temperature at this pre-dawn moment is the lowest it will be in the entire 24-hour cycle. The ground has been radiating heat for hours, losing the energy stored during the day's solar input, and the atmosphere above it has cooled accordingly. In the clearings, where there is no canopy to trap the long-wave radiation emitted from the warm soil, the temperature has dropped by perhaps 8 or 10 degrees from its midnight level. Under the canopy, where the forest functions as a kind of insulating blanket, the drop is less, perhaps 4 or 5 degrees. The dew that formed on the fern fronds early in the night has thickened in the deeper cooling of the pre-dawn hours, and the ferns now carry small beads and rivulets of water on their surfaces that catch whatever starlight reaches them and return it as faint, scattered points of light. The Jurassic dawn will not produce the spectacular color displays of a modern sunrise in a clear sky, for a reason that is interesting to think about. The Jurassic atmosphere, while higher in CO2, was lower in particulate matter of the kinds that produce vivid sunrise colors. Dust from human activity, pollen from grasses that do not yet exist, fine soil particles from degraded and overgrazed land. None of these exist in the Jurassic atmosphere, in the quantities that produce modern sunsets and sunrises. The Jurassic dawn will be clean and clear, and will shift from dark to light, with a relative lack of intermediate drama. What it will offer instead is the quality of the light itself. A first light that, falling on fern and cycad and conifer with no particle scatter to soften it, is sharp and direct and slightly bluer than midday light, a light that makes the greens of the forest more intensely green than they will be in any other hour of the day. The pre-dawn hours have a particular relationship with the human nervous system that sleep scientists have documented with increasing precision. In the hours before dawn, the balance between sleep stages shifts. The proportion of time spent in REM sleep increases. The deep, slow-wave sleep of the early night gives way to a lighter, more active sleep state, in which vivid dreaming is more frequent and more accessible to memory on waking. The brain, in these pre-dawn hours, is not doing less, it is doing something different, engaging with memory and emotional processing in a more active way. Morning dreams, the ones people remember most easily, come from this pre-dawn REM-rich period. The pre-dawn REM shift is not an accident of modern human neurobiology. It is a pattern found across all studied mammal species, and it almost certainly evolved before the Jurassic mammals diverged from the lineage that leads to their modern descendants. The small, nocturnal, polyphasic sleeping mammals of this Jurassic forest experienced their own version of the pre-dawn REM shift in whatever sleep bouts they managed between foraging episodes. Their dreams, if we can use the word for what happens in a Jurassic mammal brain during REM sleep, were probably sensory replays. The smell of the previous night's prey, the spatial sequence of a successful foraging route, the sound profile of a predator's approach, the brain consolidating what the night had taught. A single sound, high and clear and brief, from the canopy above, a pre-dawn contact call, an early awakening bird or bird-like creature, testing the darkness with a single note. It hangs in the air for a moment, distinct and alone, and then the forest absorbs it and the quiet continues. But something has been announced. Something has been started. The note was not just a sound, it was the first word of the day's first sentence, the opening of a conversation between the jungle and the approaching light that will develop through all the morning hours into the full chorus of daytime life. The darkness in the east is not yet lighter, but there is a quality to it now, a potential, an inclination that makes it different from the darkness that has been over you all night. The direction from which the sun will come is somehow present in the landscape even before any light arrives from that direction. The animals feel it. The plants feel it, their internal clocks having tracked the night's passage with the same unthinking reliability that the earth has tracked the night's passage in its rotation. Everything that has spent the night resting or hunting or moving through the dark is now, in its own biology, beginning to anticipate the transition that is coming. The fungi on the conifer trunk, those bracket-shaped structures with their pale, wet surfaces, are already responding to the moisture change of the pre-dawn temperature drop, their surfaces releasing a faint cloud of spores that will be picked up by the first morning air currents and carried into the forest. The mosses on the forest floor are at maximum hydration from the night's dew, their photosynthetic machinery primed and waiting for the first photons to arrive. The ants in their underground chambers are already beginning to stir, their chemical communication system passing the information about the approaching light from individual to individual through the colony in the chemical language that ant society uses for all of its most important announcements. You have been here all night. You have moved through the Jurassic darkness from its first hour to this, its last, and the journey has taken you places that you cannot have gone by any other route, not because those places are inaccessible to any other means of travel, but because they are not places in a geographical sense at all. They are places in time. They are places in biological history. They are the specific, irreproducible, lost, and yet somehow still present depths of a world that was real and complete and full of life and meaning 150 million years before you were born. The edge of dawn in the Jurassic is the edge of a day that will proceed without you. You are leaving now, or being left, as the transition between the night you have inhabited and the morning you belong to begins. The sun that will rise above these ancient trees will continue to rise long after you are gone from here, and the sauropods in the river valley will continue their morning feeding, and the pterosaurs will continue their dawn hunting runs above the river, and the small mammals will retreat to their burrows for the first of the day's sleep bouts. And all of this will proceed with the same complete competence that it has shown all night, needing nothing from you. What do you carry from this night? Not the facts, though those are there too, those extraordinary true things about the Jurassic world that most of us never learn in any school or book, those specific wonders of biology and geology and deep time that have been the company of this evening. Not even the memories, though those will settle in their own way. What you carry is something harder to name, the feeling of having been very small in a very large and very old world, and of having found that smallness not frightening but restful, not diminishing but somehow expansive. The Jurassic is very old and very large and has no need of you and never noticed you and continues without you and will continue after you. And in this, it is one of the kindest things you have ever encountered. The edge of dawn holds you for a moment longer. The single bird call in the canopy has been joined by a second from further east. A slightly different pitch. A conversation beginning. Two ancient voices finding each other across the dark treetops. The river flows, the ferns drip, the cycads stand in their patient, geometric stillness. And somewhere very far below this moment, below the soil and the stone and the geology of 150 million years, the deep earth turns, as it has turned since before there were nights and days at all, carrying everything with it. The night you are carrying is older than any night you have carried before. Not in the sense of its duration, it has been the same number of hours as any night, but in what it contains. 150 million years of biological history moving through it, the accumulated life of an entire geological period breathing in it, the ancestry of everything alive today, embedded in its ferns and its rivers and its ancient, resin-scented air. That is what a Jurassic night contains. That is what you are carrying now. As the pre-dawn quiet deepens, and the first, almost light, begins its very slow process of becoming light, there is a quality to the end of a deep night that has no good word for it in English, though various languages have tried. The Japanese word aware, written with the characters for mono, meaning thing, and aware, meaning pathos or bittersweet sensitivity, comes close. It names the particular feeling that arises when something beautiful is ending. When an experience of genuine depth is completing itself, when you are aware simultaneously of the richness of what has been and the irreversibility of its ending. The last hour of the Jurassic night has mono aware built into it. The forest is still here, the river is still here, the herd in the valley is still here. But the particular darkness that made them what they were tonight is ending, and its ending is part of what made it worth having. The paleontologist Stephen Jay Gould wrote that the history of life on Earth is not a ladder with humans at the top, but a bush, with all living things at the tips of their own twigs. Equally distant from the common origin, equally successful in the simple biological sense of having managed to be alive and to continue. What the Jurassic night shows you is the bush in its magnificent early form, the twigs that were living and growing 150 million years ago, the lineages that were pursuing their particular evolutionary experiments in this forest, this river, this sky. Most of those twigs are gone. Most of the Jurassic lineages are extinct, but some of them, the lineages that lead to birds, to crocodiles, to mammals, to the surviving plants of Jurassic descent, are still growing. You are one of their tips. To be a tip of the bush is not a superior position. It is simply the current position. The Jurassic sauropod was as fully alive, as fully present, as fully itself as anything that has come since. The fact that its lineage ended does not retrospectively reduce the life it lived. It fed and moved and breathed and was warm in the sunlight and cool in the river and felt whatever it was capable of feeling, and did all of this with complete biological competence for as long as its time allowed. The ending was not a failure. It was simply an ending, as every story that has ever been told by the universe eventually ends, and as this night is now ending, and as you yourself will eventually end, not as failure but as completion. The small mammals of the Jurassic carried the future without knowing it. Everything that makes the modern world of mammals, the warm blood, the differentiated teeth, the elaborate auditory system, the sophisticated brain, the maternal investment in offspring was being worked out in the small, quick, nocturnal bodies of Morganucodon and its relatives, being refined night by night in the Jurassic dark, being pressed toward greater complexity and greater capability by the competitive demands of a world dominated by animals very different from themselves. They could not know they were carrying the future. They were simply surviving, and in surviving they became the foundation of everything. You are carrying the Jurassic in you in a literal biological sense. Not metaphorically. The mitochondria in your cells are the direct evolutionary descendants of bacteria that were already ancient when the Jurassic began. The structure of your inner ear, those 3 tiny bones that make you capable of hearing this voice, evolved from jawbones that Jurassic mammals were in the process of recruiting for exactly that purpose. The mechanism by which your brain processes the experience of being awake and then releases into sleep was being established in the neural architecture of the small creatures that moved through this forest tonight. You are made, in part, of Jurassic material. The Jurassic is not behind you, it is in you. The sounds of the pre-dawn forest are assembling themselves slowly from the quiet of the deep night. The bird calls in the canopy have multiplied from 1 to 3, from 3 to perhaps 6 each, a single note or a simple phrase, each separated from the others by the particular acoustic qualities of this forest, each doing its work of establishing that the animal that made it is here and present and viable and worth attending to. These are small sounds. They are not yet the dawn chorus that will come when the light actually breaks. They are the anticipation of the dawn chorus, the testing of the acoustic space, the preparation of the social field that the chorus will activate. You notice that you are breathing more slowly than you were an hour ago. More slowly and more deeply, each breath filling a greater fraction of your lung capacity and releasing more completely before the next begins. This is the breathing of a body that is at ease, a body that has been in a consistent and comfortable situation long enough that its physiological monitoring systems have fully accepted the situation as safe and have reduced their alertness accordingly. Cortisol is at its nighttime minimum. Melatonin, produced by your pineal gland in response to darkness, is at its nighttime maximum. Body temperature is at its nightly low point. You are, in the precise biological sense, as prepared for sleep as you will be at any point in the next 24 hours. The Jurassic prepared for sleep the same way. The sauropods in their valley rest dance, their enormous heads lowered, their breathing slow. The pterosaur in its canopy roost, wings folded, eyes closed. The small mammals in their root cavities, their quick metabolisms reduced to maintenance levels during a sleep bout. Even the plants, in the hours before the day's photosynthesis begins, in a metabolic quiet that mirrors in its biological function what sleep does in animals. The whole Jurassic night is resting, as it has been resting for hours, as it has been resting for millions of years of nights, each one complete in itself, each one the same and different, each one sufficient. Sufficiency. This is what the Jurassic offers that is hardest to find in the modern world. The experience of something that is entirely sufficient in itself, that needs nothing added to it to be what it is, that does not require improvement or supplementation or the addition of meaning to justify its existence. The Jurassic night is sufficient, the river is sufficient, the fern with its droplets of pre-dawn dew and its slow uncurling of new growth is sufficient. The cycad standing in its geometric patience, the same shape it has been for hundreds of years, the same shape it will be for hundreds more sufficient. Not merely adequate, not barely enough, but full, complete, needing nothing. This is perhaps the deepest gift that the Jurassic night has to offer anyone who receives it. The demonstration that sufficiency exists, that the world, in its most ancient and fundamental form, is not lacking anything. That the universe before humanity arrived to improve it was not waiting for improvement. That 150 million years of life complex, diverse, extraordinarily productive, biologically inventive beyond anything our imagination can fully map happened without any external goal, without any destination it was moving toward, without any question it was trying to answer. It was simply alive. And being alive was enough. Being alive was, in fact, everything. What will you carry from tonight into the morning? Not necessarily conscious memories. Sleep reorganizes memory in ways that do not always preserve the specific details of a pre-sleep experience. What settles in more reliably is the feeling of it. The felt quality of having been somewhere very old and very quiet and very alive. The specific combination of sensations, warmth and resin and river sound and moonlight and the deep bass of something very large moving through the dark that will not survive as a collection of facts but may survive as a kind of weather, a mood, a quality that colors the first few hours of the following day with something not quite nameable but nonetheless present. If you carry only one thing from the Jurassic night, let it be this. You are descended from things that were very small in a world that was very large, and they made it through. Not through strength or intelligence or social organization, though all of those helped in their degrees. They made it through primarily by being alive at a moment that called for their kind of aliveness, nocturnal, quick, metabolically flexible, sensorially acute, reproductively invested in the quality of a few offspring rather than the quantity of many. The world changed, and they were what the new world needed, and they survived long enough to become everything that came after them, which is to say everything, which is to say you. The pre-dawn light is arriving. Not as brightness, not yet. Not even as a lessening of the darkness that you would point to and call day beginning, but as a quality, a direction to the air, a sense that the east has something to say that the rest of the sky does not yet have. The ferns at the clearing edge have taken on the very faintest differential tonality, the side facing east, slightly less dark than the side facing west. The difference so small it might be imagination, but it is not imagination. It is the first photons arriving ahead of their source, scattered by the upper atmosphere into a faint luminosity that touches the highest leaves long before the sun clears the horizon. The night is carrying you now, as the night always carries whatever has spent itself within it toward the morning on the other side. You have been in the Jurassic, and the Jurassic has been in you. And now the direction of travel is changing, and the great, patient, ancient world of 150 million years ago is releasing you back to your own time, your own morning, your own body wherever it rests, with whatever it carries from having spent this particular dark in the company of ferns and rivers and ancient stone and the slow, self-possessed movement of things very large and very old. Go gently. The Jurassic does not require ceremony from you on leaving. It was here before you came and will be here after. Not as a living world, that particular configuration of life is gone, but as the foundation of what exists now, as the deep past that is the deep present of every cell in every living thing on Earth today. You are not leaving it behind. You are simply returning to its surface, where the day is beginning, where the birds, the actual descendants of the Jurassic animals you heard calling in the pre-dawn dark, are beginning their morning songs. Let the night complete itself in you. Let whatever the Jurassic dark has done in the hours you have spent here do its work fully and without interruption. The morning is patient. It has been waiting all night, and it will wait a little longer. Rest in the last of the dark. Feel the weight of stone beneath you, the weight of deep time around you, the warmth of 150 million years of living world that has been your company through this long, extraordinary, ancient night. And then, when you are ready, when the night is ready, let the light come in. Thank you so much for spending this night in the Jurassic with me. If you would like to see more videos like this, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. It truly helps us continue making more content. Anyways, see you in the next one. The jungle is breathing. You are breathing. The night continues its long, patient, unhurried passage through the hours before dawn. There is nothing you need to do. There is nowhere you need to be. The Jurassic holds you, gently, the way it holds everything without demand, without judgment, without any expectation of anything except that you simply be here, simply breathe, simply rest in the warmth of 150 million years of living dark. The ferns are still, the cycads are still, the great conifers are still, their crowns far above somewhere in the dark. The river is going on. The river is always going on. It does not stop for sleep. It does not stop for anything. It simply moves, the way all water moves, always forward, always toward the next thing, and then the next, without hesitation or interruption or any sense that arriving somewhere is different from leaving somewhere else. Let your thoughts be the river. Let them move. Let them go where they go. You do not need to follow them. You do not need to know where they come out. They are going. And you are staying. Here in this warm dark under the Jurassic trees, your breath slow and deep and even, your body heavier than it was an hour ago, your mind softer than it was an hour ago, everything softer, everything slower, everything moving in the direction that nights move when they are doing what nights do best. The small mammals are sleeping in their root cavities. The sauropods are resting on the forest paths they have made over years of slow passage through the trees. The pterosaur has found its roost somewhere in the high canopy, its wings folded, its small warm body tucked against the bark of a branch, its extraordinary eyes closed. Even the river insects have entered their lowest activity phase, their wings folded, their small bright lives temporarily suspended in the way that everything living temporarily suspends itself for the night. The whole jungle rests. The whole jungle breathes, in and out, very slowly, very steadily, like something very large that has been breathing this way for millions of years and intends to continue for millions more. You are part of that breathing now. Your own breath has joined it, has found the same slow rhythm, has become part of the same deep pulse that moves through every root and frond and scale and feather and fur in this enormous living night. The stars wheel very slowly overhead. The Milky Way is where it has been all night, arching from horizon to horizon, patient and present and profoundly indifferent and profoundly beautiful and completely, reliably, permanently there. The same stars will be above your own ceiling right now, though you cannot see them through it. They are there. They are always there. The dark behind the stars is the same dark that is behind everything. The deep original dark that the universe began in and has been filled with light ever since, imperfectly and with great beauty, but not completely. There is always more dark than light, and in the dark, things rest. Rest now. The Jurassic holds you. The ferns hold you. The old stone beneath the old soil holds you. The river holds you in its sound. The stars hold you in their ancient light. The whole enormous weight of 150 million years of life, going on without pause or interruption or any need of your attention, holds you. You have done everything that needed to be done. The night is doing the rest. Sleep well. Dream of ancient green. Dream of the sound of water over stones that no human foot has ever touched. Dream of something very large and very slow and very calm, moving through the dark between the trees with a patience you have been practicing without knowing all your life. If you liked this video, let me know where in the world you are watching from and what time it is. I am always curious about that. And if you have a suggested topic for a future prehistoric sleep story, please leave it in the comments below. Sleep well. The Jurassic will be here when you wake.